I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In the name of God, Amen. We, whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, etc., having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith, and the honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents, solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, for our better ordering and preservation, and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof do enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and officers, from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness whereof we have hereunto subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the reign of our sovereign Lord King James, of England, France, and Ireland, the 18th, and of Scotland the 54th, Anno Domini, 1620.
The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I called to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I have been saved from my enemies. The cords of death entangled me, the torrents of destruction overwhelmed me, the cords of the grave coiled around me, the snares of death confronted me. In my distress I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils. Consuming fire came from his mouth. Burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering, his canopy around him, the dark rain clouds of the sky. Out of the brightness of his presence, clouds advanced with hailstones and bolts of lightning. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy. With great bolts of lightning he routed them. The valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of the earth laid bare at your rebuke, Lord, at the blast of breath from your nostrils. He reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me.
In Congress, July 4, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such forms as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government.
I'm not trying to impress you. I'm just trying to impress upon you. I'm like you. I'm no better than you. You know, I'm a 960 SAT guy.
Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions, with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert. Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring towards him. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands.
I've served this country for 14 years in the Congress, and before that in the service. I have just as high a devotion, just as high an opinion. What I downgrade, Mr. Nixon, is the leadership the country's getting, not the country. Now, I didn't make most of the statements that you said I made. I believe the Soviet Union is first in outer space. We may have made more shots, but the size of their rocket thrust and all the rest. You yourself said to Khrushchev, you may be ahead of us in rocket thrust, but we're ahead of you in color television, in your famous discussion in the kitchen. I think that color television is not as important as rocket thrust. Secondly, I didn't say we had the worst slums in the world. I said we had too many slums, and that they are bad, and we ought to do something about them, and we ought to support housing legislation, which this administration has opposed. I didn't say we had the worst education in the world. What I said was that 10 years ago, we were producing twice as many scientists and engineers as the Soviet Union, and today they're producing twice as many as we are, and that this affects our security around the world. And fourth, I believe that the polls and other studies and votes in the United Nations and anyone reading the paper and any citizen of the United States must come to the conclusion that the United States no longer carries the same image of a vital society on the move with its brightest days ahead as it carried a decade or 2 decades ago. Part of that is because we've stood still here at home, because we haven't met our problems in the United States, because we haven't had a moving economy.
If we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to a greater extent than has ever been done before. Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth. The price for this freedom at times has been high, but we have never been unwilling to pay that price. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. The sloping hills of Arlington National Cemetery, with its row upon row of simple white markers. Under one such marker lies a young man, Martin Treptow, who left his job in a small-town barber shop in 1917 to go to France with the famed Rainbow Division. There on the Western Front, he was killed trying to carry a message between battalions under heavy artillery fire. We're told that on his body was found a diary. On the flyleaf, under the heading, My Pledge, he had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure. I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone. We must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. It is a weapon that we as Americans do have. Let that be understood by those who practice terrorism and prey upon their neighbors. As for the enemies of freedom, those who are potential adversaries, they will be reminded that peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it now or ever. We are Americans.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeat in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? The Lord is with me. He is my helper. I look in triumph on my enemies. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes. All the nations surrounded me, but in the name of the Lord I cut them down. They surrounded me on every side, but in the name of the Lord I cut them down. They swarmed around me like bees, but they were consumed as quickly as burning thorns. In the name of the Lord I cut them down. I was pushed back and about to fall, but the Lord helped me. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation.
The poorest way to face life is to face it with a sneer. There are many men who feel a kind of twisted pride in cynicism. There are many who confine themselves to criticism of the way others do what they themselves dare not even attempt. There is no more unhealthy being, no man less worthy of respect than he who either really holds or feigns to hold an attitude of sneering disbelief toward all that is great and lofty, whether in achievement or in that noble effort which, even if it fails, comes to second achievement. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who, at the best, knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
Too many of us think it is impossible. Too many think it is unreal. But that is a dangerous, defeatist belief. It leads to the conclusion that war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. We need not accept that view. Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man, and man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again. Surely the opening vistas of space promise high costs and hardships, as well as high reward. So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are a little longer, to rest, to wait. But this city of Houston, this state of Texas, this country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them. This country was conquered by those who move forward, and so will space. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Midnight, oh, it's never too soon. see you, or I get near you. I wanna love you up from some down to love. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to American Advocates. This should be episode 197, coming to you guys live on Tuesday, August 25th, 2026. And there's a lot to go over today. Some of the news coming in tonight. Darline Graham winning her GOP primary runoff for the state of South Carolina. I'm going to push that to the back end of tonight's episode, but I want to go over it nonetheless, because if you're not careful, this could be a massive doomer pill moment for you as a far right-wing conservative, having witnessed, of course, Lindsey Graham finally dying as the boomer filth that he is, the neocon war-worshipping filth, finally going to the grave, descending into the pits of hell. And you think finally we can get at least a halfway respectable Republican candidate into South Carolina as a senator, and along comes his sister, Lindsey Graham, who has really no good political experience in her past, and despite this, winds up being propped up by literally the system, literally the establishment, in recognition that Trump is the system now. He is the establishment. He is the boomer con. And so Trump has been endorsing now Lindsey Graham's idiotic sister. And listen, she seems like nice enough of a person, but wow, is she stupid. And I've got some clips I'm going to show you at the end of tonight's stream to demonstrate just how dumb she is. But nevertheless, she receives the endorsement publicly from Trump. They're pushing for her to get in, and I think that they're preying on her stupidity and naivete. I think they want her in because they recognize in some ways she's even better than Lindsey Graham for the military-industrial complex. She's now in. She's in regards to winning her GOP primary. And it's a real blackpilling moment for you if you don't know how to handle this. So we're going to go over that, but more importantly, too, we're going to go over, again, geopolitics. Get used to geopolitics, by the way, on this channel, because that's what we're going to be talking about throughout the course of Trump's presidency, since he has decided to betray his movement and forsake us at the domestic social level and choose foreign affairs, choose the Israel lobby over us. Now the midterms are going to go blue, and all that he's going to be left with is the ability to focus and hone in on foreign affairs even more, since after November, and really after January 2027, when Congress changes over, he won't really have the power to get anything done, and even when he's had that power, he's gotten virtually nothing done. And that will leave us on this channel with the only option left to discuss what he's doing, and what he'll be doing will be foreign policy stuff, where the Democrats can't restrict him as much since he's in direct oversight of that as commander-in-chief. So get used to it. Geopolitics is the future. Anything but America first. Get used to it. So we're going to be discussing geopolitics. This is going to be, before we get into the Darline Graham situation here and just how moronic MAGA is and how much they are self-destructing and imploding this Republican Party without realizing it, we're going to go over these sanctions in Iran once again. This will be part 2 to what I was covering on last night's episode regarding Scott Bessent and President Donald Trump's economic crusade now against Iran, in what they're referring to as Operation Economic, what, I can't even remember what they call it. These stupid fucking military operation names, Outcast. Operation Economic Outcast. Or just Economic D-Day. Last night I went over it and I discussed the loopholes, the issues, how the sanctions won't work, why they won't work. Tonight I'm really going to get into it further using historical references as well as, of course, predicting what these sanctions will lead to. And spoiler alert for you, the predictions of what these sanctions will lead to are predictions that I've already made on this channel. And I have an excellent track record in predicting things in regards to this war. So we're going to get into that and Darline Graham at the end there. Be sure to like the stream if you haven't already. Double tap your phone screens, hit the thumbs up button. It's free to do, and it does encourage YouTube's algorithm to push the show out to more people who need to see this. Just like the stream, subscribe also if you haven't already. That's free to do as well. Turn on post notifications so you're notified every single time I go live. But we'll get into this right now. Also, I want to thank Beck Fan for the $2 super chat tariff in the horizontal stream. He says, I have work tomorrow, but here's a donation. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Get some rest. Have a good night. Enjoy your job. Enjoy your work tomorrow. And yes, be aware I'm streaming in 2 formats, multicasting on both horizontal formats and on the vertical YouTube Shorts feed, and they both come with different chats in the streams. So depending on where you're watching this, phone or tablet or computer, you may want to check out the different options to watch it on. Anyways, getting into this, blockades and sanctions, the biggest escalation traps that always lead to more war. Not less, more war. And they seem more peaceful, but they always result in violence. It seems like the easier pill to swallow to say, oh, we're sanctioning them economically. This is an economic war. Recognizing, of course, that millennials and Gen Z and Gen X to some extent who fought alongside the oldest of the millennials in the Middle East wars of the 2000s, recognizing the fact that there just isn't an appetite for that. There really isn't. And with midterms on the way, you have to be even more cautious about what actions you take in the Middle East. Trump has decided in the latest string of events now in all of this to wage the economic warfare, the economic D-Day as he called it. And so last night I went over Scott Bessent's speech, and we dissected it here on this channel. I did. You enjoyed it. You learned from it. I dissected it. And I played several clips, I think 2 precisely or 3. Yeah, 2 clips and one of them taking a question about China, where I basically broke down and analyzed what the issues were. First and foremost, acknowledging really what Scott Bessent's speech was all about last night in regards to these sanctions on Iran, where I called out openly the 2 real main objectives of his speech. Because again, the speech was being done to announce sanctions on Iran, economic warfare on Iran, Operation Economic Outcast, Economic D-Day. And so if you're only a headline reader, you just assume Scott Bessent gave this boring speech about sanctioning Iran's economy and squeezing them harder to force them to surrender. But in truth, Scott Bessent's speech, like I said last night, was really not that much about that. In fact, when Scott Bessent was talking about the Iranian sanctions, as I accurately pointed out last night and stated, and as I had been predicting before his speech last week when Trump announced this whole idea, he was basically announcing in the speech and not so subtly hinting about how the sanctions weren't going to be easily enforced, acknowledging that not only would they be hard to force, but in truth they might not even work. He was talking about the black markets and all of the bypasses to the sanctions and how America is attempting to move forward in a fashion that holds the countries that engage in those responsible. And I mentioned Hawala and SIPs, etc. And so when it came to the Iranian sanctions, in some ways, Scott Bessent was almost acknowledging defeat before implementing them by acknowledging the fact that there are so many avenues in which Iran and all of the countries that support Iran can just bypass our sanctions without us really even being able to stop it or figure out that it's happening entirely. We know that it happens, but we can't really pinpoint it. It's hard. Hawala is an honor system, like I broke down last night, and makes it, not untraceable completely, but really difficult to get a crack going in that system to put a stop to it. And so when it came to that, Scott Bessent's speech almost became redundant. What I honed in on last night and really chose to hone in on and focus on regarding Scott Bessent's speech was the messaging behind it. The secondary sanctions, in fact, that he mentioned being imposed on countries that decided to ignore our sanctions on Iran and choose to support Iran anyway. the secondary sanctions, where I said, essentially, this is the United States now really, the line in the sand's been drawn. We're now retracing it with secondary sanctions. With sanctions in general on Iran, we're sort of retracing it. We are at a point now where, why I brought up the G7 last night and why I showed the clip of Trump discussing the G2 and how significant that is because we are at a point now where it's becoming a bipolar world order. And at the top, the two countries at the top are China and the U.S., who are very clearly economic rivals. And so with that acknowledgement out there and obvious at this point, what we have seen with President Donald Trump, every action, whether for better or for worse, whether he should be doing this or not doing this, every action or most actions are being done in a manner where ultimately it is drawing lines in the sand and forcing every country, every major power player in the G7 and beyond to draw their line in the sand. Which side will they take? Because ultimately, this is going to play out over the course of the next several decades in a manner where China and the U.S. continue to compete, and it's not going to stay a bipolar world order. Ultimately, there'll be a winner and a loser, and ultimately, that is forcing these countries now to make the decision. Where do they want to hedge their bets, with China or with the U.S.? And so in some ways, like I mentioned last night, what this is doing is this is now forcing that decision to become more evident. These sanctions, imposing these sanctions on Iran, affect China. This actually does affect China. Now, the MAGA chuds in the past, they've been insistent that this entire war is secretly about China, and it's not. It just never has been, and it's not going to be, and it's not going to affect It's not going to affect China enough to even justify that kind of thinking. Let alone the fact that in many ways China will actually be benefiting as a result of this war playing out, and I've already gone over that in great detail in the past on this channel anyway, as I've also predicted that would be the case. I've been vindicated through the passage of time throughout the course of this war, where, like I've mentioned numerous times, we've pulled THAAD systems out of the Indo-Pacific. We've removed the last USS aircraft carrier out of the Indo-Pacific. This doesn't hurt China. This actually makes China's life and job and purpose and goals even easier to carry out. So that's where we're at on that, and that's what I pointed out last night with these secondary sanctions. Essentially, if you continue to support Iran, the U.S. will also sanction you. Secondary sanctions. Well, China's not thrilled about this, and China doesn't even choose to acknowledge U.S. sanctions anyway. And I went over last night about how BRICS was specifically formed to counter the United States and the global reserve currency that is the U.S. dollar. BRICS exists to undermine the U.S. dollar, and so they've already set up these systems in place like SIPs to bypass this. And China has already imposed laws straight onto Hong Kong out of Beijing or whatever, where they basically buckle down on any corporations or companies in China that choose to try to honor U.S. sanctions. They punish the companies with fines, which makes the sanctions redundant. Either you honor the U.S. sanctions, or you just get fined by China anyway, or you don't honor the U.S. sanctions, and then you get secondarily sanctioned by the U.S. as well. So China has basically done everything they can to essentially pull the rug out from underneath America when we go the sanction route. In addition to the secondary sanctions, and really the line in the sand being drawn by Scott Bessent's speech, the other thing that I brought up last night was that ultimately this speech once again acknowledges what this war was always truly about, and it was never obviously about nukes. Never. No actual respectable intelligence community, including the ones that aren't all that respectable, in my opinion, like the CIA. Ratcliffe himself, according to reports, the current head of the CIA under Trump, even told Trump it's a bad idea. Tulsi Gabbard, head of national security, told Trump it's a bad idea. And both of those apparently came together to literally demonstrate to Trump why it was a bad idea with what they had, or what they believed at the time was proof that Iran didn't have nukes. And it didn't matter because it really wasn't about nukes. Nukes are the narrative for all of you low IQ plebs. Nukes are the narrative for the average everyday goy slop-eating American who buys into that bullshit. for the boomers who just love to find any way they can to justify war in the Middle East. This narrative worked for the boomers when it came to Iraq and Syria. It's not working now because young people don't fall for this shit. But this administration still lives in the 1980s, and Trump is truly the boomers' last gasp. Everything he does is, reeks of boomer conservatism and neoconservatism now. So they went with the nuclear messaging and narrative because nothing else was believable, and in some cases, some other things were PR nightmares. Regime change openly as a purpose is a PR nightmare. Persian liberation doesn't work with conservatives because we're not the side that's supposed to have that kind of a bleeding heart. That's for liberals. That's why the liberals support Ukraine. Conservatives don't care. I don't care about Persian liberation or the Iranians gaining their freedom. So the regime change is the real reason. And they couldn't say it, so they went with nukes. They tried Persian liberation at first. It didn't work, so they went with nukes. But ultimately, this was done at Israel's behest. And you have to examine it always from the standpoint of, what does Israel want? And of course, Israel wants a softened Iran, and that means almost certainly a different regime that is soft and malleable and weak and more willing to cooperate with U.S.-Israel interests in the Middle East region, rather than a regime that is filled with hardliners like the one currently that despises Israel and the United States and is willing to wield its power and throw its weight around in the Middle East to antagonize and ultimately oppose the United States and Israel, and specifically Israel, who wants greater Israel, of course. And Scott Bessent's speech last night really highlights that because, again, sanctions are meant and imposed on countries to essentially crumble the economy, with the understanding that a crumbling economy and poor economic situation and a terrible, terrible living conditions that break out as a result almost certainly would lead down the line to a civil war of sort or an uprising in the streets / a rebellion where the obvious regime leaders would then be targeted by the general public or even internally be targeted and assassinated, ultimately killed, with a new regime put in place. That's what the sanctions are about, and that's what Scott Bessent's speech, like I said last night, really was hinting at. It was hinting at, once again, what the real purpose of this war was, which was regime change. Now, the calls for regime change, essentially, the calls for regime change and Scott Bessent's latest economic D-Day plans ensures one of my biggest predictions almost certainly coming true. And that's really what this first segment of this stream is going to be about. It's going to be about just walking you down the logical steps that will take place as a result of these sanctions, and concluding with one of my biggest predictions I've made on this channel. So that's what this is going to be about. Now, I want to give some credit to where credit is due here. I was looking at this account right here. I want to show you guys this. Let's see. I'll just do yeah. This is Robert A. Pape, Professor Pape. He is a professor of political science and directs the Chicago Project on security threats, and he's the author of Bombing to Win. He writes his Substack, The Escalation Trap. This is a great follow on X, and I was looking at his stuff today, and it was very useful for what I want to talk about today, because he goes over on his Substack and he's got a YouTube channel, and he's been on other YouTube channels talking about this and tweeting about it. And he goes over the history of U.S. sanctions, and that's really part of what I'm going to get into today. I'm going to give some historical examples of U.S. sanctions applied in the past to justify why I am talking about them the way that I am and why I come in with such certainty that they won't work. I've already explained in the past one of the biggest hindrances to the sanctions would be China, and it will be that way. But in addition to that, the historical precedent and examples and the past experiences of sanctions also paint the picture that I've been saying on this channel. They just don't work. They don't really achieve the goal that they're always imposed to achieve. And if anything, they accomplish the opposite. They always especially accomplish the opposite of what our leaders tell us they're being imposed for in order to avoid, which is outright war. We are always told when sanctions go in place that it's being done to punish a nation, to starve their economy, and force them to surrender peacefully, with the implication of that being we don't want to go to war with this country. But the history of sanctions being applied to these countries and imposed always turns out with the opposite result. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to go over, because again, what was my biggest prediction on this channel? My biggest prediction on this channel that has yet to come true, not because I'm actually technically wrong for predicting it, but because the way this has played out, obviously there's no appetite for this and Trump has to be very cautious about it. But I predicted on this channel that boots on the ground would be imminent in the Middle East, specifically obviously in Iran. And that prediction still applies today. We haven't really seen boots on the ground happen, but I predicted that all the way back on March 2nd, pretty much the second day of this war. I went live and I said, listen, there's really only one way that this war continues and ends. And I walked everybody down on that live stream back when I was streaming on my cell phone. I walked everybody down it on March 2nd. I said, this is how it's going to go. It always goes this way. Boots on the ground is inevitable. Boots on the ground is imminent. I also have mentioned in the past too, and I'm going to bring this back up tonight as well. Additionally, that the Trump campaign quietly has been preparing to possibly deploy a nuclear bomb on Iran, or so it seems that way. They're taking massive steps behind the scenes in the firing of multiple different generals, and the movement of a lot of nukes out of EUCOM to CENTCOM, and CENTCOM has been overseeing the Middle East, and 3 or 4 nuclear warheads have left essentially Europe then and have been transported to CENTCOM in order to be basically in their possession, and CENTCOM oversees the Middle East. So I've talked about this on prior episodes, and again, sanctions in the past have literally, and this is undeniable, thanks to Robert Pape, what I read today, I've got the examples ready to go. Sanctions have led to both more war, further escalation, and yes, sanctions led to nukes. So that's what we're going to get into here. Again, be sure to like the stream right now if you haven't already. Double tap your phone screens, hit the thumbs up button. It's free to do. It doesn't cost you a dime. It costs you less than 1 calorie to move your thumb over your phone screen and double tap it, or to find the thumbs up button and tap it for me. And it does a whole lot for the good of this channel in forcing this channel to share this show with more people who need to see this. Also subscribe, of course, especially if this is not your first time being here. Now, here's what I want to get into. The Iran regime is, for what people don't understand, the Iran regime seems to be roughly 20% of the total Iranian population, which currently sits at anywhere between 90 to 93 million total people. So 20% of that averages out to be just shy of, 20 million people? 20% of that averages out to be essentially 10 plus million people. And by the Iranian regime being 20%, you factor in both those who support it as well as those who are a part of it. And here's what you have to understand when it comes to a regime of that size, when it comes to regime change. You can rule over a population of people with much smaller numbers. Much smaller numbers. This comes back to force doctrine, really, and the idea that those who are the most violent always find their ways to positions of power and find a way to keep their power, or at least hold on to it for a long time, and rule over all of those who are predisposed to being passive and peaceful. And so it goes like this, essentially. Give a guy an assault rifle in a crowd of 100 people, and the second he shoots 2 or 3 rounds and yells at everybody to get on their knees is the second he has complete control over the room, despite the fact that, of course, 100 people could storm him all at once and trample him. It never happens that way. This is how this goes. So understanding that 20% of the population either supporting or actively being a part of the Iranian regime currently that we're at war with is significant. It is a large enough number to where regime change creating regime change in the manner we're trying to create it will never work, ever. And that is why Charlie Kirk, the late Charlie Kirk, was so accurate when he said that regime change can truly only come from the ground up. And that essentially means either naturally from citizens in an uprising fashion or artificially from war and boots on the ground. And of those two options, there really is only one good one, and that is when it happens naturally from the people, from the citizens of that country, because then it's meaningful and then it has the best chance of lasting. But again, even what's written in our Declaration of Independence, this is also unlikely to happen too. The Declaration of Independence, literally written by our founding fathers, acknowledges that it is the right and duty of the people to rise up and overthrow their government should it turn into a government filled with despots who are outright seeking to rule over us in tyrannical fashion. But immediately after that, our Declaration of Independence, as you see on my pre-show, also says, history has proven and determined that the people are more willing to suffer under evil as evil is sufferable. Meaning that most of the time, almost every time, the people will never rise up. They will just submit to evil and they will grin and bear it, sometimes for decades or centuries. And a country is usually more likely to collapse outright and fall apart, never to return to prominence, than it is to be overthrown by its people and saved. Grim reality for you, but the truth. And so ground up regime change in Iran is already fanciful. But on top of that, not only is it fanciful, but it's fanciful in the fact that it has to come from the citizens, and it's just not going to. So even if it comes from boots on the ground or from an invasion force, we have a historical precedent for that kind of regime change too. It's called all the other Middle East countries, and those never go well for us in the future anyway. We destroy those regimes. We put in place a new regime, or we usher in democracy. And within months or years, sometimes just a few short years, sometimes way less than that even, it collapses the second we leave the region. The second we leave it to their own devices. Immediately what you see is the hardliners return and they slaughter the new system that we set up in place. They decapitate it literally, or stone them, or whatever, and they take over. So there really is only one hope for that, and it's not going to happen. In fact, they already made an attempt at this, and it failed miserably. But that's what's on the table, and that's why it's so fanciful. And here's really what you have to understand here. For those who insist that this is not about regime change, for those who insist that this is not done at Israel's request to serve Israel outright, with nothing else being factored in, for those who insist that, no, didn't you listen to Trump? Didn't you listen to Trump? This is about Iran. They can't have nukes. Be a good guy and tell everybody Iran can't have nukes. Well, I present to you this right here. President Donald Trump himself, literally, this was his speech the night, really, that we started the attacks on Iran. This is February 28th. President Donald Trump coming out to talk to the people, to the Americans, about why he's going to war with Iran. And take a listen in this speech. It's 8 minutes. I'm not going to play all 8 minutes. I'm going to play the first 30 to 40 seconds of it. But take a listen even in that of what he's talking about when justifying this war to us. Not selling it to us, mind you. They never did that, ever. The Trump administration never once tried to even sell this war to us. They just did it and then explained to us. They patronized us, really, and explained to us and justified to us why it was going to happen and really why they didn't care what we thought about it. But take a listen to this.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America and waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder, targeting the United States, our troops, and the innocent people in many, many countries.
That was the opening to his speech. It wasn't about nukes, because at that time, they hadn't figured out what the winning messaging was, what the correct narrative was to sell to us. This was at a time when they were throwing baloney on the ceiling to see what would stick and what wouldn't. And so they went down the avenues, like I said, of, well, they have ballistic missiles, and that's a major threat to Israel, and they've been test firing them, and they might be able to hit some of the far east of Europe. Well, we didn't give a shit about that outright. Israel's becoming a zeitgeist with Gen Z. Gen Z secretly would love nothing more than to watch Israel burst in flames and disappear off the map. And do we really care that much if Europe can be hit? No, honestly, we don't. So that didn't work. So they went the Persian liberation route with the bleeding heart liberal tactic. We're conservatives. The people who put Trump in office don't have bleeding hearts. We don't care about Ukraine. We're also not going to care about Iran and the people that reside within it. It would be nice to see them rise up and overthrow their regime. Sure, I wouldn't complain about that. They're not going to, and I don't care. So that didn't work. And then they mentioned regime change on the night of the war. Well, that they quickly realized was not popular, and they very quickly dropped that. In fact, people all over the internet were sharing Charlie Kirk's tweets about how regime change is impossible from just the skies or the seas. It must come from the ground up, and it's a foolhardy endeavor. So they dropped the regime change thing very quickly, and they ultimately settled for Iran is developing nukes. Despite the fact that, again, people were accurately pointing out what was the point of Operation Midnight Hammer, June 2025, where we destroyed, or allegedly, I guess, destroyed Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordo. It didn't matter. That's what they went forward with, and that's what they were doing. And ultimately, that proves, in many ways, that it's always been about regime change and serving Israel. Beyond that, if you need even more proof, take a look at this right here.
Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. For many years, you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. No president was willing to do what I am willing to do tonight. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want. So let's see how you respond.
So again, he does what here? He calls on the Iranian people to take up arms, essentially, against their own regime. And he even goes on further in different speeches from here as well to compare the Iranian regime and the people rising up against it to a Berlin Wall moment, and requesting the regime in that speech there even to lay down their arms peacefully. It was about the regime. Why? Because it's what Israel wants. Benjamin Netanyahu visits the White House February 20th, sits in the Situation Room, and sells the entirety of this war to President Donald Trump, without a doubt pointing to the harmful Iranian regime and how threatening Israel felt by them. He then, no doubt, though he later would deny this on 60 Minutes here in America when he traveled here, he then no doubt, and according to the behind-the-scenes reports that have been largely accurate actually, he no doubt likened it to the Venezuelan operation of taking care of Nicolas Maduro, where we went in 2 hours and kidnapped him and his wife, and beat the shit out of his wife, by the way, for whatever reason. She came here with like a black eye. They threw them both in like a New York City prison cell, And then they set in place the vice president under Maduro to take over, who promised to America she would be compliant and malleable to our demands and wishes. And she was, or has been so far, from what I've gathered. And we've taken some of the Venezuelan oil, and it was a wonderful operation that I fully endorse and support. That's what the Monroe Doctrine looks like. I've said that 1,000 times at this point on this channel. So Netanyahu sells it to Trump like that. Never minding the fact that, of course, Iran is this large, massive nation. It's the Persian Empire of old, basically. And never minding the fact that it's filled with a population of 93 million strong, and 20% of that's the regime, like I expressed, and they have a super strong military. And Trump falls for it. And he falls for it, and he does what Bibi wants. He does what Israel wants, and that is he goes for regime change. And we decapitate the regime in the initial strikes. It's exactly what Israel wants. If you need proof of that, just take a look right here at Benjamin Netanyahu himself on Fox News, saying that that's what he wants.
I think it will, what will it take? It will take for Iran to understand, either for this regime to fall, or for Iran to realize that the cost of wreaking economic chaos to the world, murdering its thousands of its own citizens, and shooting at everyone, I mean literally at everyone, at Saudi Arabia, at Bahrain, at Qatar, at Kuwait, at the UAE, at Israel, at Jordan, every single one. I mean, this is what this regime is doing when they don't have nuclear weapons. So imagine what they would do if they had nuclear weapons. I think when this regime is either toppled or it's sufficiently weakened that it knows it has to end its nuclear program and has to change its course. That's really what President Trump is trying to achieve, and I back his fully his efforts to do so. If he can do so without returning to intense military fighting, that's fine. Why not?
Now, so much is on display there, but it's all being referenced in the form of the desire of Israel to see the regime change, literally. And that's why it was decapitated in the strikes, with the hopes of Trump in his speech on that night saying Persians, or Iranians rather, or a mix of both, whatever, rise up and take back your government. That was the intended outcome all along. That's what Trump was sold on. That's what Trump believed would happen. And it just didn't. The regime was decapitated but not replaced or not destroyed. It wasn't changed out. It was replaced by hardliners, some of the sons who are younger and more rigid, and if not, other younger commanders, generals, military leaders, etc., simply just rose up. It grows back like a Hydra monster. Cut the head off and one comes right back to replace it. And in this case, it's younger, more rigid hardliners in Iran that are now the new regime. It's worse than it was before. And it was all done at the behest of Israel, and Israel wanted this. And Benjamin Netanyahu's been open about it, and at first, so was Trump. So that is undeniable, and I wanted to get that out of the way, because if you don't understand that, then we can't move forward to, again, get back to this point now on August 26th, what I started August 25th, we can't get to this point where Scott Bessent is imposing these sanctions, and you can't enter this kind of a circumstance with any proper understanding of why the sanctions are being imposed now, and what the true intent of those sanctions are, which is to cause or force economic collapse in combination with the Trump blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, and in doing so, force the people or the regime to collapse or the people to replace it out of desperation, economically speaking, in order to then reach out with a new regime to the United States and essentially surrender. This is the purpose of the sanctions. I said this last night. Now I've more thoroughly explained it to you tonight, with the evidence of the fact that that's what we went into this war to do. It was never about nukes, ever. And so with all that being said, I want to now get on to the part where I explain in even greater detail, not more greater, just greater, even greater, I'm having a Candace Owens moment, even greater detail, I want to explain just how bad of an idea the sanctions are. I've gone over in the past other ways they'll fail. We're going to get into it even more, and this one's going to be inspired a little bit from, once again, right here, Robert Pape. This is his Twitter channel. He's a great follow. I highly recommend following him on Twitter, and his Substack article, The Escalation Trap. So we're going to get into that. Again, be sure to like the stream if you haven't already. Double tap your phone screens, hit the thumbs up button. It's free to do, and it does encourage YouTube's algorithm to push the show out to more people who need to see this. Also subscribe if you're enjoying the content. This is essentially his Substack article right here. I got that shown on both the formats. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to make sure people can read it on the vertical, hopefully too. If not, if you can't read it, just STFU and listen. This is his Substack, The Escalation Trap. He says the title, Bessent's Economic D-Day is up against the weight of history. Escalation Trap live briefing. So he goes on to say this. This afternoon, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent unveiled the Trump administration's long-promised economic D-Day against Iran, calling it the single greatest financial offensive ever marshaled against an adversary. The administration says the strategy will economically isolate Iran, force capitulation, and make another major military operation unnecessary. But there is a problem that Washington cannot sanction away: the weight of history. Since World War I, major powers have repeatedly used blockades and economic coercion to try to force ambitious political outcomes. Economic pressure can inflict enormous damage, but maximum economic pressure alone has not won a major modern war since 1918. And it's worse than that. Targets often lash back. When governments believe economic pressure threatens their survival, they do not necessarily capitulate. They can adapt, shift the costs onto their populations, seek alternative trading partners, and escalate against the coercing powers of its allies. Iran is already warning that countries cooperating with Washington will face consequences. And this is all true. And that's why I want to go over this. He mentions the historical precedent of sanctions dating all the way back to World War I, 1918. And again, throughout the course of this, keep in mind what I predicted on the second day of this war, essentially. Boots on the ground is imminent. Keep that in mind as we go over this. Regime change is what this war is all about. Boots on the ground, I still think, is imminent. And now the sanctions are in place, and it's all that is remained to be seen is how Iran will respond to it. And history sheds light on what we can and should expect in regards to this topic. So, essentially, Professor Pape points this out. Examples. He cites the 1918 World War I. I've got the examples here. Examples of maximum pressure economic sanctions being applied all throughout history. Now, he talks about World War I. The reason why he does that is because during World War I, Britain wound up imposing a blockade on Germany. And it was a blockade that led to devastating effects when it came to the German people. And so 1918 was essentially the last time that he cites where it really worked in the ways intended. And that's because Britain imposes the blockade, and even then that doesn't actually work. The blockade did what it needed to do to soften Germany and their economy. The people at one point were starving so badly that they were essentially reduced to eating half the normal amount of food per day that they were up until that point. And this did soften them. And then ultimately what wound up having to happen still was that the blockade did what it needed to do, but it couldn't end the war. It couldn't win the war. Ultimately, boots on the ground went in. U.S. armed forces went in to Germany, World War I. So that took place, right? That's why he's mentioning 1918. Now, beyond that, the other examples of the sanctions being put in place, you fast forward to World War II, past World War I, and we look at Japan, 1941. This is the example of maximum pressure economic sanctions being applied. The U.S. wound up imposing oil sanctions on Japan when the war, we wound up imposing oil sanctions on Japan. And then after that, after a time, the war winds up really starting, really taking off. And when that takes place, unlike with Germany in World War I or Iran in the modern day, and how even just last night, I said this for a reason, Iran's not like Cuba, right? Iran's not like Cuba. Cuba's an island. We can surround it, and we do surround it. We have surrounded it. We're squeezing the shit out of Cuba. It will work in this case because it's a tiny country and it's surrounded. We are choking it off from the entire fucking world, literally. And with Japan, it was kind of the same thing. You go from Germany, World War I, the blockade works, but not enough to end it all because Germany's not an island. Japan was. So we sanction them with oil. Then the war really gets heated. It really kicks off. We impose a similar naval blockade on Japan. They're surrounded. They're being choked off by the sanctions. They're being isolated essentially by the blockade. And this leads essentially from the years 1941 through 1945, where we see this combination of sanctions and blockade, the result on the Japanese economy. They're suffering immensely. And Robert Pape even talks about this too, where he says this, and he says, literally, the sanctions were the reason why Japan decides to go through with Operation, I guess you'll call it, Pearl Harbor. December 7th. And here's how that history actually unfolds for you in a timeline manner, and why it's important again to understand this is because these sanctions are being imposed on Iran right now. And we can really, I don't think we can expect that much different of a result. I'm not saying Iran's going to target America like Japan did. I don't think they have that capability, but we can expect something bad. So in 1941, pre-US sanctions, Naval Admiral, the Navy Admiral of Japan, Isoroku Yamamoto. He's their Navy Admiral for Japan, and he's extremely opposed to the idea of going into a head-to-head war with the U.S. He expresses to all of the commanders around him, to the Japanese, he expresses what he considers to be the impossibility of defeating America. But that's where the sanctions come into place, because that was pre-sanctions. Then July 1941 hits, and this is what changes everything. The U.S. imposes these oil sanctions on Japan, and Japan winds up deducing that ultimately these sanctions would lead to total economic collapse in Japan in under 2 years' time. They were expecting total collapse and defeat by 1943. And so as a result of this, Admiral Yamamoto winds up completely flipping on the notion of not attacking the United States. He goes from, please don't do it, it's impossible, to we have nothing left to lose. He goes from being a hardline no to, yes, direct war with America immediately. He then winds up literally personally leading the charge in Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, not even 6 months later, really. So in doing so, the reason why is because the threat of sanctions on Japan were that severe. This is what people have to understand about the psychology of these countries and these nations. 1941 wasn't that long ago, and even if you want to look at it as such, the psychology of nations and their leaders, and in many cases their people, Japan, very nationalistic country, very proud country, proud of their culture, willing to defend that to the death. They were worried about the collapse as a result of the sanctions so much that they felt backed into a corner enough to where they decided to take on the giant. And when people feel like they have nothing left to lose, they don't just roll over and accept it. That's the real lesson here. They tend to go out fighting, especially people like the Japanese or people who have religious, they're religious zealots or they're nationalistic or a combination of both. Which brings you back to Iran in many ways, right? Now, Yamamoto, during these strikes, he openly acknowledged the likelihood that the conducted strikes on America would hasten the defeat of Japan by Americans, recognizing that you're poking the bear. Pearl Harbor was poking the bear. It was awaking the giant. It was really antagonizing us to the point of desiring revenge. And Yamamoto recognized and acknowledged this and said as much to the Japanese. He said, what you're doing literally is essentially poking the giant, and almost certainly this will bring about our defeat faster. But what they were holding on to was hope. And essentially what Yamamoto wound up concluding was, we're very likely accelerating our defeat by the Americans, but we have nothing left to lose, and there's at least a chance that if we devastate them on Pearl Harbor enough, we may make them just scared enough to lift the sanctions on us instead and focus on Germany more rather than focusing on us. Obviously, that didn't work, and obviously we went and did what we did, but the whole point in all of that is to say that the sanctions didn't end anything. They only kickstarted more. At that time, Franklin Roosevelt had been selling the U.S. sanctions to the American people as nonviolent means to punish Japan for being on the wrong side without needing to go to war with them. That was how it was sold. It was sold as like, it's not quite an exit ramp it was sold as then, but it was sold as essentially, well, this is how we do this without firing on them or starting a war. What winds up happening is it encourages the Japanese to start a war, to blow up Pearl Harbor, to attack us, which leads to us needing to avenge that. We send the forces overseas, we get involved in a war with them, and where does that lead? That leads to not just war, but also understand, Hiroshima and Nagasaki wind up taking place as a result too, really. So it's not just boots on the ground and war, but nuclear war. That's the worst case scenario. But that is literally what took place, and sanctions were behind a lot of that, or most of it, or really all of it. And that's it. That's one of the greatest examples. Now, in addition to that, there's Iraq 1991. In Iraq 1991, we sanction them similarly. We do the same thing. We sanction them in 1991. We wind up enforcing no-fly zones with what winds up being across 60% of Iraq's airspace, and this was all done to constrict and suffocate their economy. There's a lot of parallels between Iraq and Iran. There's parallels between Japan and Iran. Blockades, no-fly zones, etc. All of this is to just shut down and constrict their economy and squeeze it out. And so this winds up taking place for 13 years. We sanction Iraq from 1991 all the way to that infamous year, 2003/2004, where we all know what happens then. The Iraq regime had not cracked, not nearly enough to surrender or capitulate or stay out of our way or do anything that we wanted. Iraq wound up galvanizing. They wound up becoming more of a threat, or at least what we deemed to be more of a threat. And 13 years of sanctions did not bring about victory or surrender or any of it. It did not prevent war. We ultimately wind up deciding under George Bush that they were hiding WMDs, and that can only mean one thing. We need to go in and get them and keep the world safe. And that becomes the excuse then to send in the boots on the ground and start a real war. And then we're fighting Afghanistan and Iraq. And we go on to fight Iraq for something like 10 years. And the combination of both those wars leads to $8 trillion of U.S. debt being tacked onto our national debt. An absolute disaster. And that's what it took to topple the regime in Iraq. That's what that took. Sanctions didn't do it. They just didn't work. We went in because of WMDs with ground forces. Then the regime fell. It took boots on the ground. Also, a more modern example, even more modern than Iraq 04, is essentially President Biden and what we have been seeing play out with Russia and Ukraine. Sanctions have been on Russia. Sanctions have truthfully been on Russia since the early 2000s, really. And when Russia did what they did with Ukraine under Joe Biden, because his fat-mouthed bitch vice president wound up saying that maybe she'd recognize Ukraine as, NATO or whatever else, and angered Putin, and next thing you know, he's at war with Ukraine, Biden imposes sanctions, and he promises that these sanctions would be horrendous and the worst, most rigid, uptight sanctions possible, and it would bring Russia to their knees. Did that work? No. We've gotten more war. The war is still ongoing, and what we are seeing is Ukraine looks to be on the verge of falling to Russia. Not that they haven't put up a good fight, they just actually devastated Russia, to be fair, just a couple of days ago, taking out a huge base, a huge military base, and they've targeted their infrastructure. And during this war specifically, as I've stated on this channel, we've actually seen both sides advance drone warfare significantly as a result of it. But the fact that that's what's happening proves to you that, again, sanctions don't work for a multitude of reasons. Not just the resolve of a country, but the bypasses of it too, which I explained last night. In addition to that, that leads me to the main point, right back to Iran, and something I've already mentioned. We've been sanctioning Iran on and off and at war with their economy and with them as a people since November 1979. And since 2010, we've been also carrying out the maximum pressure sanctions on Iran. 15 solid years of the airtight maximum pressure sanctions, brutal sanctions on Iran. And that hasn't worked either. They're still powerful. We have watched now for literally almost 6 months to the date. We have watched Iran put up an incredible defense against a much larger and on paper more powerful nation in the form of America. We have not been able to shut down their nuclear program or prevent it if they're going forward with it even. And again, was this war about nukes? Not really. Not at all, truthfully. But we still recognize that they're doing shady shit with the nuclear program. We're theorizing they've moved it under Pickaxe Mountain. What can we do about that? Nothing. We've been sanctioning Iran since November 1979 to some capacity, and for the last 15 years, we've buckled down on it, and they're not weaker. We have watched Iran create, at an alarming rate, ballistic missile after ballistic missile, and get a hold of drone after drone and successfully use these in different combinations and at different times to attack land targets like Fujairah. They successfully struck Fujairah with just a handful of drones. They've successfully struck multiple ships in the Strait of Hormuz using a combination of either drones, land-air cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. They have factories under all of these mountains where they produce these ballistic missiles day and night. The regime isn't stopping. They're not weaker. They're getting stronger in many ways. Or at least they have been over the last 15 years. And we haven't been able to achieve any of our goals in the region. We haven't shorted them of ballistic missiles, destroyed the stockpiles. They closed down the strait after we started the war, and we can't reopen it. It is still closed. And they're still blowing up ships that try to exit it at the request of Trump. This is all ongoing. A country that would be decimated by sanctions wouldn't be able to do this. They're doing it. So no, it's not working. Moreover, like I said earlier, we decapitated their regime back in March and they replaced it with mostly younger, more rigid hardliners who are Muslim zealots. That's what they are. The internal civil war that the MAGA chuds were insisting would break out in Iran never happened. They already crushed that uprising that had taken place before February 28th. You may remember hearing and reading about how 40,000 Iranian citizens, allegedly at least, rose up to try to topple their government. And what did Iran do? They turned off their internet and they slaughtered them all. The resistance that tried to rise up did and failed. No matter what the authenticity and genuineness of that movement resistance was, it failed. And Iran slaughtered them all. And that was before the war. And that was with a softer, older regime that we decapitated literally. And we blew them up. There's a harder regime in place now. And they've been selected intentionally, by the way, to literally be more resistant to possible future uprisings and rebellions. Furthermore, too, and this is something I've disproven many times on this channel, the civil war between the IRGC and the rest of the Iranian parliament and military, this is one of those other narratives where, again, people are so retarded. They're not well read. They never read anything. They just listen to what their favorite political commentator says, and he's just saying what the Trump administration wants him to say, or if he's independent, he's saying what he thinks the Trump administration wants him to say, so he can get a little pat on his head and maybe an endorsement sponsorship of some sort. And these people at one point in time were literally, they were putting out this narrative, and I proudly on this channel disproved it and was totally vindicated by that. Again, it's why you should like this stream right now, double tap your phone screens and hit the thumbs up button and support this channel, because I put out the truth, unlike almost everybody else. I actually read about this stuff. I actually study about this stuff. I actually have sources that are credible that I respond to, like Professor Robert Pape and others. Most of you low IQ retards don't even know about any of that. I'll do it for you, though. Don't worry. Just like the stream and subscribe and keep coming back. That's my only ask. I shattered that myth back then. This whole concept from the MAGA cultists and chuds, the don't be a panikin, support Trump no matter whaters, they were saying, listen, you don't understand, this Trump blockade is lethal. It's going to choke off Iran, despite the fact that they're not an island and not totally dependent on the Strait of Hormuz anyway, and despite the fact that they have the Caspian Sea outlet and railroads that lead through all different outlets of the country across all different borders into Azerbaijan and all that. Despite all of that, their connections with Russia and China, the Strait of Hormuz being blockaded, that's enough. And it's going to cause a massive internal civil war between the Iranian government officials, their parliament, and the IRGC. You're not understanding it. Trump is playing 5D chess and you're playing checkers. And this internal uprising is going to happen where the parliament takes control of their military to oust the IRGC, and then the parliament will work with Trump. This is what I was told. This is how stupid people are. What I went live on at the time and said was, that is absolutely not true. The IRGC is in control. They drive the ship. And I was totally vindicated in that when I got to gleefully report on the Iranian parliament supporting the IRGC. It was the IRGC with their mafioso tactics that said, from now on, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and when we reopen it, we'll be charging for passage through it because of what Trump did. And we'll never not charge for passage through it now. The IRGC leads the way on that. They're the most aggressive faction in Iran. They are the militant hardliners. They respond and serve directly the supreme leader, who's now Mojtaba Khamenei. And they have all of the aggression backing them and the reputation. And they said this and stated this. And people were trying to insist, no, the Iranian parliament doesn't support that. And they actually really like Trump, or they at least don't like the idea of being enemies with America, and they'll never do it. You were all fucking wrong, you idiots. The Iranian parliament wound up going on to not just draft legislation in support of creating literally what's called the Persian Gulf Port Authority that is being set up or will be set up to literally collect a fee from all transiting ships through the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian parliament not only drafted that legislation, but they voted either unanimously or almost unanimously in support of it. And this was done to support the IRGC in their efforts. That civil war is not coming. I said it then, and I'm going to say it now. So that settles that. It was all a farce. Now, in addition to all of that, here's what people also need to understand when it comes to that dynamic. There will be more of that in the future due to the sanctions, not less, more. What we will see is essentially the administrative state of Iran. They will want to support the resistance against America, even if the lower tier, lower class plebs, the Persians and the Iranian everyday people, even if they start starving a little bit, even if they start complaining about quality of life, even if their power grid winds up struggling and they're losing electricity throughout the day and they have to go dark more often, even if all of that happens and they start, no doubt, to get a little bit nervous about an uprising, the hardliners are in place to literally quell any uprising by literally just killing the uprisers, literally. They'll shut off the internet and kill them. They did it already earlier this year. They'll do it again. And even if that continues to happen, the administrative state of Iran will want to support the IRGC, and they will do so to the detriment of their own people. This is nothing new with Iran. They are a regime. They will begin pulling money out of all other places possible, and they will send it straight into the pockets of the regime to keep them funded and strong. This is how this works. It's called bureaucracy. And then that leads me to the next part here. The regime will stay strong. It will stay prevalent. Iran will continue fighting America. That leads me to this, enforcing the sanctions. Now, I've already mentioned some of the problems with this, the China problem being one of them. and how China essentially is the largest customer of Iran's oil, purchasing anywhere between 80 to 90% of their oil. And so with that on the line, and with China, as I already said earlier this stream and multiple times now throughout the past several weeks, China doesn't recognize U.S. sanctions and actively fights them. China has a law in their country that they impose on their corporations by basically telling their companies, you don't recognize U.S. sanctions, and if you do, we'll punish you. Usually with fines, I believe. So China doesn't already support U.S. sanctions to begin with. The bigger problem, in summary, and I won't go into detail because I already did an episode on this, the bigger problem with China not recognizing the sanctions and with being Iran's largest customer of oil, and with the fact that China has been on their private oil reserves for many months now and is coming off of those to become a customer on the global oil markets again, where they will then be looking to Iran to buy their oil, obviously. The biggest problem with that is they won't pay the sanctions. They'll encourage their companies to not recognize the sanctions. They'll support Iran anyway. And a lot of our production and manufacturing is not just partially, but almost totally dependent on China. You can thank all of the politicians in the late 80s and especially throughout the 1990s for that. We are too dependent on China to be able to leverage sanctions against one of their allies and keep them in place, really, in full effect like we want, if China, their ally, says, no, actually, you're not going to sanction us when we buy Iran's oil, that's for sure. We have burned through our high-grade munitions. We are running low on Patriot interceptors, JASSM-2s, the THAAD systems that we had to pull out of the Orient, of the Indo-Pacific, and move to the Middle East. All of this is a massive problem for us and for our national security. It truly is a war of attrition. And I've gone over the math and the precise numbers of that. Just to paint the picture for you, Iran produces a ballistic missile for what we assume, they don't go into detail, but we know that they're not expensive. We assume the cost is probably around $250,000 per ballistic missile. They have factories buried deep under their mountains going day and night producing these, and they don't seem to have problems despite the years' worth of sanctions that have piled up against them. That's one of my points there. They produce these ballistic missiles for that cheap. 250 grand when it comes to war is not expensive. And they're effective. They're not incredibly effective, but effective enough. We, on the other hand, when it comes to our Patriot interceptors, we spend $3.7 million per Patriot interceptor. And when it comes to shooting down Iran's attacks, our military doctrine is called shoot, shoot, look, which means that we not only shoot once at a missile coming our way, we shoot twice. That's not $3.7 million, that's $7.4 million to target what? One $250,000 ballistic missile. That's the attritional element at play here. And we have burned through a lot of these Patriot interceptors because on our end, it costs a fortune to make them, and China is slow in the production of them, deliberately so. So it takes years to replenish the stockpile that we have burned through. It's going to take us years to replenish that fully, and it's going to cost us a fortune. Meanwhile, Iran just pumps out 250 grand ballistic missiles and just keeps launching them, and we keep responding. And it's gotten so bad that the U.S. Armed Forces are reporting that they're told now to deliberately ignore or decipher which strikes from Iran are worthy of being shot down and struck down by Patriots and which ones are not, meaning we let the strike continue. We actually allow it to take place. This is how bad it's getting. And China, here's the thing, and my point in all of this, we need rare earth magnets in many cases to be able to replenish, outright build and replenish what we have now depleted in the form of these Patriot interceptors and these high-grade munitions. Well, where do we get rare earth minerals from that creates the rare earth magnets? Where do we get that from? China. Because China is now in a position where they are responsible for 94% of the entire global rare earth mineral processing. They also produce a lot of the parts that we use to create our interceptors and our missiles. We're dependent on them in more ways than one. production, manufacturing, and now we're dependent on them for our own defense and national security, which has been jeopardized as a result of this attritional war going on way longer than it should. And so with all of that leverage in mind, that is where the full picture is painted that if we try to sanction Iran, China's their biggest customer. China is under threat of sanction for its supporting Iran. China says, no, you're not going to sanction us, and they're Iran's biggest customer. And they have all of the leverage of producing our shit and processing the rare earths that we need to replenish our shit. Do you understand now what's at stake here? That kind of leverage means that China gets to say no, and there's really fuck all we can do about it. If we go through with the sanctions, what does China do? Well, they're holding our national security in some ways in their hands. They won't say no. They'll slow roll it even more, though. They'll let the clock keep ticking. They'll let the attritional elements play out more. And it's not like we can just dig up the rare earth minerals for ourselves tomorrow. We have just become totally dependent on China, and it should make you sick if you're an American, that is the reality. We should be able to produce our own shit. It's actually inexcusable that all of our politicians in the 90s, the globalist H.W. Bush, what a fucking pig, and Clinton, disgusting. These disgusting politicians, these boomers, they just encouraged and decided and allowed this to all take place. But here we are nevertheless, and that is the problem. That's the China problem with the sanctions. And if we can't sanction China, if we can't impose the sanctions on China purchasing Iran's oil, then the sanctions, the power of the sanctions is drastically reduced. They're not as meaningful anymore. In addition to the China problem, too, we have other allies that are not thrilled about this either. And that would include most of Europe at this point. And this is really just similar to how Trump operates now. It's kind of like February 28th all over again, where you find out that Trump just kind of does things and then waits to see how it plays out, and then ultimately decides from there what to do. And so, like in February 28th, we just bomb Iran out of the blue, basically. And you learn after the fact that our allies weren't called, they weren't given advance notice. Trump just does it. And what you see beyond that is, then they close down the strait. And if you remember how that unfolds, Trump then goes to NATO and he says, help, help, they've closed down the strait. Come over. Send your ships over. Send your Air Force over. We may need boots on the ground. Send your armed forces to the Middle East to come fight with us and die for Israel. And how do they respond to that? Well, sadly, all of the gay European leaders over there, most of whom I despise for the most part, somehow have turned out to be way more nationalistic and protective of their people than Trump has been. They all say no. They all say no. And we're left alone dealing with a problem that we created. Now, you fast forward from February 28th to August 25th, sanctions are in place with Iran, and what is Trump doing? Now that they're in place, he makes public statements and reaches out and calls upon Europe to abide by the sanctions. Stop supporting Iran. Don't be a customer. Abide by our sanctions. They're not thrilled, needless to say. So that's happening too. And then we come into the problem too of Iran being able to bypass them. So, excuse me there. Essentially, all of this is at play right now. China's a problem. They won't respond to it. They won't abide by it. And if that won't happen, then the sanctions don't mean as much. And I went over the history of this with Japan and with Iraq and Russia. The sanctions don't work anyway, really. They never have. Literally never, by the way. They just never have worked. It leads to more war. It's an escalatory trap. And then you get to the point where you have to recognize like I did last night, the bypass methods, the methods in which these countries bypass our sanctions anyway. And I discussed Hawala and SIPs last night. Hawala, the ancient honor system that's been around and originated in India back in the year 1315, is used now as sort of this black market type way involving a broker who takes the cash and gets the goods and then basically gives it over to another broker who then parts it out differently. It's this whole complex system meant to literally avoid the banking system. It's ancient. And it takes two witnesses, men of good reputation who are involved in Hawala. They carry out the deal. It's very complex. But this is how this can be bypassed, through Hawala. And then if there needs to be banks involved and crossing of borders in the process and payment requests, etc., China has created CIPS, CIPS. And this is essentially their own version of this that uses yuan dollars and allows all of these countries to bypass SWIFT, which is what we have in place as America, to essentially impose these sanctions and kick countries out of that don't abide by the sanctions. I also went over, of course, Iran's shadow fleet that kind of originates or deals heavily in the Malaysian region, in the Strait of Malacca, etc., and all down in that part of the world. It's about 350 vessels strong, and the process in which they get away with bypassing sanctions, despite the fact that they're Iranian ships, is that they turn off their transponders so that they can no longer be tracked. And once that happens, they switch the flags out on their ships literally to Malaysian flags. They rebrand the ship essentially, and they even blend down the oil differently to make them undetectable. Then they turn the transponder back on at the right point, and they look like a Malaysian ship instead of an Iranian ship, so they don't have to deal with the sanctions. So that's all at play here. This is all of the biggest problems. These are literally all of the biggest problems. And I wanted to show this too, actually. I already showed you, the whole Trump thing, and, it's about regime change and then Yahoo backing that up. Here's an important map. When it comes to sanctions and enforcement, and when it comes to all of the bypasses, this is something I didn't get into last night and definitely am going to get into right now. Right here. This is a map you should be looking at. This is a map that highlights the railways and Iran's international connections and communications. This is a map of essentially some of their infrastructure. It's a map of Iran in general, which most of you retards probably haven't even bothered to look at, you low IQ goyim scum. Now I'm forcing you to look at it, and you should be grateful enough to literally like the stream right now, double tap your phone screen or hit the thumbs up button, and type a Yes, okay, we're still good, right? Looks like we had lost connection there for a second. Man, I hate when that happens. That's unfortunate, but okay. It looks like we are good. Yeah, okay. Back to what I was saying. This map reveals everything, truthfully, or a lot of what you need to know and understand when it comes to a country being sanctioned. Look to the railways. Now, I have discussed this whole thing with Iran. I have mentioned throughout the course of the last several months the Caspian Sea to their north, and I've mentioned their railroads. And what I've mentioned in passing on it and in discussion of it is it's a way to bypass the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And this is what you need to understand when it comes to the Trump blockade, because it's the blockade and the sanctions now that will be working harmoniously by the United States to constrict and squeeze Iran's economy. And it will work. There's no doubt about it. It's working now, and it will continue to work. But what will happen over time, and you can see on this map all that they've developed here, what will happen over time is Iran, and you can see the Strait of Hormuz here is south. You see Bandar Abbas, that's one of their ports, and Bandar Abbas sits smack dab in the middle of the Strait of Hormuz, right near Keshem Island there. And then obviously up into there is, more of the Persian Gulf, etc. And so what you will see over time is Iran will begin to slowly pull away from utilizing the Strait of Hormuz. The longer this goes, the more they'll reroute their trade goods, their exports, etc., and they'll use the railways that are developed all over Iran, which is a very large country, Iran, and they'll reroute it onto the railways, onto the railroads, onto trains that will then take those goods, those exports, and transport them over the land instead of through the sea. Probably a slower process in most circumstances, not as efficient necessarily, more costly perhaps even, and certainly on trains you can't nearly move as much volume as you can on a massive cargo ship. But nonetheless, this is what they'll do. And what you can even see is that a lot of these lead right up to the Caspian Sea to their north, which allows them to have access to a lot of their northern trading partners. So the Strait of Hormuz being shut down by the blockade and the sanctions being imposed have many loopholes in which Iran can bypass them. And Iran is not, as a result, they're not worried so much about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz because, first of all, this war won't be permanent. And so the Strait of Hormuz can't stay closed forever. But let alone the fact that they have all of these bypasses potentially at their fingertips that they can start slowly utilizing more and more the longer this war goes over time. And it's not a cure-all, and this is important to understand too. This is not a cure-all. The Caspian Sea can't make up for it. The Strait of Hormuz is, in my opinion, more important than the Caspian Sea to Iran. And the railroads, like I just explained, are not the full solution. But the problem is this. The sanctions, China won't abide by them. The sanctions can be bypassed with Hawala and SIPs, etc., and multiple other different loopholes and means of doing so, a shadow fleet. In addition to that, they can reroute a lot of their traffic and a lot of their trade away from the Strait of Hormuz for a period of time onto the railroads and into the Caspian Sea, which nullifies more so the blockade. So the blockade is cut, the usefulness of the blockade continues to be cut down in usefulness. The usefulness of the sanctions, the power of the sanctions, continues to diminish over time. And Iran is able to draw this out longer and longer than they should be able to as a result of that. As a result of utilizing this and finding these methods of bypassing all of it and undermining the efforts of the United States, they will be able to limp on longer and further the more time goes on. That is what people need to understand here, and that is what people are not grasping, and that's why I posted that again right here. I posted this. This is on my X account. You should go follow me there at American_ADVO, because this is a map people need to see. That Strait of Hormuz, this puts that into perspective, just what the Strait of Hormuz is. Very significant, a main artery of the Middle East, but not the end of the world for Iran because of the sheer size of their country and their other alternative options. So people need to grasp that, and they're not going to otherwise unless they're watching this channel. Again, like the stream, double tap your phone screen or hit the thumbs up button, because you're not going to get information or displays like this on most of those other average IQ channels that report the news. Now, here's the deal with this. The United States has already, in effect, acknowledged that this is a problem too. What has Trump said in the past? He would target their infrastructure. It would be bridge and power plant day, he said, right? And he has said this more than once. And they know then, as a result, that the Caspian Sea is a problem. That's why in the past we have taken action on them. We've targeted their bridges. We have blown up their bridges. We've targeted their railroads, if I remember that correctly, and I believe I am remembering it correctly. We have targeted and blown up a section of their railroad. And I also, if I remember right, I believe it was either us or it may have been Israel, actually, who seldom ever helps us, being the goyim that we are, the disposable goy. They goad us into these wars, but they never really help us or go all in on us, on it with us. It may have been Israel, though, that took care of a Caspian Sea port. I think I remember reading that. And if not, it was us who did it too. But either way, we have tried to take out some of this infrastructure, or at least proven that we can, or tried to prove that we can, to threaten Iran when it comes to using it for the purposes of bypassing the Strait of Hormuz and sanctions, etc. What's the problem with doing that? China actually is the problem. Again, this is where China comes in, and they continue to help Iran. China is already helping Iran by essentially telling Trump and America to fuck off with the sanctions. That's a big problem, since they're the biggest customer of Iran and willing to buy 80 to 90% of Iran's oil. But China will also come in, and they have already done this. We've blown up a bridge in Iran. China came in and in under 48 hours fully repaired it and rebuilt it. We blew up part of their railway. China comes in and helps Iran rebuild the railway, respike it and everything. And even with the Caspian Sea, I believe China was there as well. Moreover, China, as I've reported on several times here, has been not just rebuilding and repairing after U.S. strikes on soft targets in Iran, but they've been then supplying Iran with the MANPADS. And MANPADS are the shoulder-mounted anti-aircraft missiles, the launchers. And these MANPADS essentially are China's way of not only just repairing the damage done by the U.S., but providing Iran with the means of defending against future strikes. And so that way, basically, they don't have to keep coming in and rebuilding. Iran can now just begin trying, at least, to shoot down fighter jets and helicopters from the United States that come in to strike soft targets, or any target for that matter. And we already know that Iran has done this. They've shot down 2 of our F-15s. I believe it was 4 Black Hawks, possibly an F-35. And that leads me to the next problem, which is Iran's threat once again in all of this. They have their scorched earth doctrine. And this they've threatened to carry out since pretty much the start of this war, and they've threatened essentially a 2.0 version of that just recently in response to Trump touting Economic D-Day, where they said, if you do that to us, we will go scorched earth on all of your interests economically in the Middle East. We will target soft targets all throughout. And they did this, by the way, in response to sanctions. And in response to Trump dragging out the war too long in their words. In the words of Robert Pape, once again, it's a lashback, he called it, the likes of which we have seen happen virtually every time sanctions are imposed. And so this is what they're promising, and they basically they gave Trump a deadline. The deadline, when did they give it? I don't even remember now. It's all becoming a blur. But it was well over a week ago. I think closing in on 2 weeks ago, they gave Trump a 3 to 4 week maximum deadline to pull out of the region, end all hostility with Iran, and force Israel to stop all hostility with Gaza and Lebanon, to abide by the Memorandum of Understanding, and to recognize Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. And they basically said, if you don't do this in the next 3 to 4 weeks, and they said this about 2 weeks ago, we will start targeting your economic interests. Trump comes out with Economic D-Day, and Iran buckles down and doubles down and says, if you impose sanctions on us, we will hit you back where it hurts economically. And that is why Robert Pape calls it a lashback. And that is certainly where this is going to lead to. It's the escalation trap on display before our very eyes. And it leads to more escalation, not less. You can see the strategy unfolding here more and more that I've been saying on this channel. I've been predicting all of this on this channel since the start of this war. A war of attrition, an escalatory trap, quicksand I've compared the Middle East to, and some other people have too. Regime change, like mowing the lawn or trimming your bushes. It grows back, it comes back. And you can see how all of this is all unfolding now. The blockade is slow. The sanctions are slow. It's meant to be slow. This is my theory on this. Excuse me. This is my theory on this. This is meant to be slow. And it's meant to be slow because of the midterms. Now, I think over time, as time has gone on, I don't think the midterms are quite the constraint that even I thought they were. Studying Trump's mannerisms and deciphering between what is an act from Trump and what is genuine from Trump, feelings-wise and expressions-wise, I do believe, actually, that Trump doesn't care all that much about midterms. The problem is, he still really is hoping that the midterms stay red. He also, no doubt, is receiving, like I said last night too, phone calls from an assortment and wide array of GOP politicians who ultimately are going to be more in tune with the American people than Trump is at this point, since he's a lame duck. He doesn't really have to care all that much about what we think. They do. Mike Johnson wants to stay majority speaker, and John Thune wants to, well, actually, I'm not so sure. With the Senate, it's a 6-year thing, but these House of Representatives figures, they want to hold on to their positions of power, and so do the senators that are up for re-election this year. So they are no doubt calling Trump, and they're pressuring him to come up with a solution to this Iran war quickly. And Trump wants it to stay red. It's not like he would want it to go blue, even if he doesn't care as much as I originally thought he would. And so with all of that being said, This is being dragged out slowly, and what I said this was a strategy over a month and a half ago now at this point. I said, I think Trump wants to drag this war out and limp across the midterm election finish line so that after the midterms, really no matter how they go, he can resume the war at whatever pace he deems appropriate and possibly even at full force. Ceasefires have been promised, ceasefires have been broken. The MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, was signed not once, but twice by Trump, electronically and publicly. It is now dissolved. It is gone. It has been done away with. We're back at war, and now we're sanctioning Iran. The tit-for-tat strikes that were occurring during the ceasefires and during the MOU, those were deliberate. And at the time, I went live on this channel and pointed out the strategy there. We were taking advantage of the tit-for-tat strikes by using them to, in my opinion, deliberately try to continue softening up the coastal region of the Strait of Hormuz in Iranian territory, targeting the Bandar Abbas region and targeting Keshem Island and targeting Karg Island and targeting the Sirik port, all of these military targets, all of these radar stations, etc. We were trying to not only soften them, but keep them softened for what I felt like at that time, too, was going to be limited capacity boots on the ground. Thankfully, that never happened. But this is all being done deliberately and rather slowly and drawn out. The ceasefires are a catch-your-breath moment so we can try to replenish as best we can before going into round 2 and round 3 like a boxing match. But ultimately, too, the bigger picture is we are now at the 6-month mark when we were told 12 days, 2 weeks, then 3 weeks, then 4 to 6 weeks. And just like back then, my prediction was right again, where I said there's no way it's that quick. You can't put a timeline or a deadline on war. And these wars go on forever, I said. I was right again. It's just like, I'm just right about everything. That's why you should subscribe to this channel. You're literally looking at the smartest YouTuber out there. It's not even close. All of you Goyim scum in the chat are so fucking stupid. You need this channel. Moreover, you need to share this channel with your even dumber friends so that they too can increase in knowledge. So subscribe and share. It's the least you could do for all of the gems I'm throwing out there for free. But that has all been the thing. And behind the scenes, I've pointed this out too, the firing of all of these generals. You know, we're looking at a system in place here being set up. And we're looking at, in my opinion, what is an intentional and deliberate, drawn-out conflict because of the midterms. It benefits both Trump to some degree. I think he thinks it benefits him more than it does. But it certainly also benefits Benjamin Netanyahu, who will also be up for re-election this October before our midterms. And he has managed to hold on to power way longer than he should multiple times as a result of literally wartime. And if Benjamin Netanyahu loses his power, he is up for grabs in the courts. He's wanted for war crimes, not just internationally, but actually by his own country. So that is what's at stake right now, and this is a long, drawn-out process. The sanctions are slow, and they are always meant to be. It's a slow constriction. Now, if Iran responds, that changes the pace a bit and then ultimately puts pressure on Trump to react to that. So we're really going to have to wait and see how it all unfolds. But history has already determined, like Robert Pape has said, history has already set the precedent for what we can and should expect the end result of these sanctions to be. And it's not an exit ramp like Scott Bessent was trying to hint at yesterday during his speech. It is an escalation to full-blown war. If Trump can limp across the midterm election finish line, and the midterms stay red especially, then within days or weeks, we're going to war with Iran. That's my prediction. I hope I'm wrong about that, and I may never get to find out, depending on how midterms go, or what Trump's mindset is at that time, but that is what seems to be at stake here and at play. That is the bigger game being played out. Because like I showed you, Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump admitted at the start that this war was about regime change, and the regime has only been decapitated and replaced by more rigid hardliners who are therefore more dangerous to Israel, not less. So Israel will never be happy with this result, and Trump is a cuck for Israel. He's a Zionist. He's a neocon Zionist, and he will do what Israel tells him. And so that's what we're looking at here. That's my analysis of all of that. Be sure to like the stream. Like I said, we're going to move on to the next topic here. I want to talk about Darline Graham winning her GOP primary runoff, just how stupid MAGA is, and how depressing our political landscape is currently, but where there's hope and what we should do about it. So we're going to talk about that next, but first be sure to like the stream, double tap your phone screen, hit the thumbs up button. It's free to do, and it does encourage the YouTube algorithm to push the show out to more people who need to see this. Also subscribe to American Advocates for more content like this. I go live pretty much every single day with, 1 or 2 days off per week. Now, let's get into this next topic here. I just wanted to, in an somewhat unorganized manner, I just wanted to rant about, really not just rant, but discuss the Darline Graham, the sister of Lindsey Graham, the now dead, thankfully dead, senator of South Carolina. Darline Graham wound up winning the GOP primary runoff tonight, and she had this to say right here. Let's show the tweet. Yep. Okay. This is her tweet. She says, South Carolina, I am deeply honored and humbled to accept your nomination as the Republican candidate for the United States Senate. First and foremost, I thank the Lord for his blessings and guidance. To my family, President Trump, Team Graham, and the countless supporters across our state, thank you for believing in this mission and standing with us every step of the way. From the bottom of my heart, I am grateful for your trust, your hard work, and your commitment to South Carolina's future. Now we turn our focus to November. Together we will fight for our values, defend South Carolina, and keep America strong. Onward to victory, she says. So yeah, she wound up winning, and in short, I will just say this very bluntly because I'm an equal opportunity offender, and it's the truth anyway. Darline Graham is a fucking idiot. She is about as dumb as it gets, and she was purposely set up to take this position by the Trump administration, who is under the influence of neocons who love wars like the current Iran war, and Lindsey Graham did too. So they don't want to even risk anybody else who's possibly better than Lindsey Graham on this taking over his Senate seat. Lindsey Graham's death was a massive blow to the disgusting Zionist pig regime, and to Ukraine for that matter. Both countries of which he served much more so as a senator to than he ever did to his own home state. So that is the deal with Darline Graham. She's a moron. They literally propped her up because of the name recognition and because of the emotional sentiment that they were counting on being there as a result of Lindsey Graham dying this year. And apparently not enough Americans were celebrating that death like we were here on this channel. I guess it matters enough to some of the retarded 70-year-old boomers out there who worship death and love Israel and war, so much so that it was able to provide Darline Graham, a moron and an inexperienced politician, an actual GOP primary runoff victory. This is how dumb she is, and this needs to be seen by everybody, because this is what we're dealing with now in the form of a possible U.S. senator.
Senator, are Taiwan and the South China Sea national security issues for the United States? If so, why?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Are Taiwan and the South China Sea national security issues for the United States, and if so, why or how?
I'm just going to be honest here. I'm not on national security. I'm not that informed on national security, so, but I do support the military.
That's not like AI, that's genuinely what she said. And when it comes to our U.S. senators, I've expressed this before, especially about her now thankfully dead brother, Lindsey. I've already expressed the fact that I don't want our U.S. senators often flying overseas to Israel, a disgusting nation, or Ukraine, truthfully almost equally disgusting nation in support of more wars, in support of U.S. involvement in more wars. That I don't want. I didn't like Lindsey Graham doing it. I didn't even like the Maryland Senator, Chris Van Hollen, flying down on U.S. tax dollars to El Salvador in pursuit of restoring citizenship to an illegal alien wife beater, Kilmar Garcia. This is not what senators should be doing. Senators, the extent of their business in foreign policy should be wrapped around their involvement in the decision-making process on new treaties being signed, really. And of course, going to war or leaving wars, sure, they can be involved. So foreign policy is important. That shouldn't be that important either. That being said, to be that running for that high up of a position in our U.S. political system and to openly express, well, I don't really know, foreign national security and foreign policy, that's not really my thing. She doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about, okay? China and Taiwan, that's not a hard question to answer about. Obviously, we understand the dynamic. Anybody who reads at all knows what's going on between China and Taiwan. We understand. She should know. She should be well versed on that as a politician that high up in our political system, or as somebody trying to be that. She didn't know. And while in some sense her honesty is actually endearing, and I will admit, I wish more politicians were that honest, it doesn't change the fact that while the honesty is actually refreshing, the answer itself is the worst possible one, and it's incredibly alarming. Despite the fact that was her answer, she received an endorsement from President Donald Trump. And it goes back to say that the reason why they want somebody that fucking stupid as a senator is because she in her own words, to top off the answer on that question, well, I support our U.S. military. Yeah. That means that if and when she likely becomes senator, we're going to have another, at her advanced age too, she's a boomer or close to it, another neocon warmonger. Worse yet, she won't even fully understand what she's supporting. But Trump will tell her to do it, and she'll do it. And so in some ways, she's the AOC of the right. She's the airhead. She's the vessel with no brain. The one that just says stuff in a ditzy manner, and it's cute enough, I guess, for people to still vote for her. A useful idiot, truly. A vessel for the main agenda. That's what Darline Graham is. And I wanted to show you this too, because she won, and this was, did I have the results? I think I had the results pulled up, right? Because it shows what she won by. It was not a huge lead. I thought I had that pulled up. That's actually my bad. She wound up winning, Darline Graham, in what I believe was something like 52-48 or somewhere 53-47, 52-48. I think some of the votes may still be coming in. But that's what she wound up defeating the other GOP primary candidate for. And now she's going to advance and move forward to November against Annie Andrews, I believe her name is, who's the Democrat senator running in South Carolina, who stands literally for gender affirmation care. The problem is, once again, and my main point in all of this is a big black pill, if you're not careful at least, for anybody who's an actual young reactionary conservative like myself. A lot of younger white men in America are very conservative. And they're beginning to identify all of the major problems, not with the Democrats and the liberals, because those problems are no-brainers. Everybody already knows. You look at the Liberal Party and they're literally saying like, you should just chop your penis off and pretend you're a woman, and we'll even call you she, her, if you want. Go dress like a woman. We love that. You're entitled to everything, and socialism, democratic socialism is wonderful, and, we don't need, as younger white men, to take a hard look at Democrats and make a long laundry list of, well, this is why they're bad. Blah. It's very obvious to young men. Any young guy filled with testosterone and who's masculine and actually wants what's a strong, safe, secure society understands already the problems with the liberal party. They despise white people. They despise men. They despise the police. They despise law and order. They love drugs. They love all kinds of weird gay sex. They love all of the nonsense, all of the delinquent bullshit that ruins and degrades and deteriorates societies. If the liberals become more prominent in America, we'll just be staring down the barrels of 1920s Weimar Germany. We all know this, and most young men don't want that. Most young white men don't want that. They're increasingly drinking less as a demographic, they're going to church more, and they're more conservative. But because this is all happening and because our country is deteriorating so rapidly with all of these social dynamics at play, the dynamics between men and women and between the races and the culture and everything else, and the white people becoming more and more, or less and less, I should say, of a majority in America, young men are not taking a look at Democrats to demonize them. We got that part. Young men are taking a look at our own party. And we're looking from within to find out why everything is going so wrong. Because it's not like America has been run strictly by Democrats for the last 70 years. JFK was shot in the head, Lyndon Johnson took over. And then from Lyndon Johnson, we got a bunch of other presidents. There was Nixon, there was Carter, there was Reagan, there was Clinton, there was H.W. Bush, George Bush. I'm not listing this in exact order here, but the Bushes were Republicans, Nixon, Reagan, Republicans. Biden, Obama, Democrats, obviously, Clinton, Democrat. But the whole point is to say that to really look at it properly is to acknowledge that over the last 70 or so years, this country has been on a sharp decline, and both parties have led us to this point in their own unique ways. And that means that the Republicans are not only not exonerated from the decline of America, but they're fucking responsible for it too, in their own unique, disgusting ways. And this is the realization that young men are having when it comes to this party. And moments like watching Darline Graham, after taking the stage and literally not being able to answer, in my opinion, what should be geopolitics 101 type question about China and Taiwan and the dynamic there, that is a black-pilling moment to watch it be answered that way and to think, oh, that's the disqualifying moment. It doesn't matter anymore. She'll surely lose. Only for Trump to come out and endorse her harder and push her across the finish line in the primaries in South Carolina. It is now between her and a Democrat candidate. Just understand this. This is what younger men are going to look at who are conservatives. This is actually the problem. And I have this as well as an example of this problem, because you see where the problem truly lies in tweets like this right here. This is a tweet from Scott Pressler. His page is called The Persistence. Scott Pressler is an incredible ground game expert of sorts who moves across America in various different districts that are swing states or districts that can be won and toppled by Republicans. He goes door to door. He does campaigns or assists in campaigns for Republican candidates, and he has his ear to the ground when it comes to the conservative movement. Now, Scott Pressler was obviously a big Trump voter back in 2024 and did a lot of groundwork for the Republicans at that time. And so he puts out this tweet, South Carolina, get out and vote for Congressman Ralph Norman in the Senate runoff today. That was the opposition to Darline Graham. The polls are open at 7 p.m. You can see this response to his tweet from a boomer woman, Cherry. You can see the picture there. An attractive woman to her credit, but that's a boomer for you. Her profile says MAGA, President Trump heart, sunset lover. Why are you pushing Ralph Norman when President Trump has endorsed Darline Graham? With a suspicious emote face. Believe it or not, that tweet highlights one of the major problems. And if that one doesn't do it for you, then take a look at this one here. Everyone's favorite cat turd. I don't know how many people know what cat turd looks like, but picture like a wannabe Yellowstone TV show viewer who cosplays as a fat white boomer cowboy afterwards and pretends that he's tougher than he is. That's Cat Turd for you. And Cat Turd celebrates this as well by retweeting the Polymarket odds and saying, never, never, never doubt a Trump endorsement. Two boomers, with plenty more out there as examples, I'm sure, celebrating Trump's endorsed candidate winning over what would have been probably only a slightly better pick, but at the very least, not another Graham as Senator of South Carolina. This is the problem with the conservative movement, pictured right there in both those tweets. First of all, boomers. Why are they a problem? For a multitude of reasons. They're dumb. They're simpletons. They're neocon war-worshipping mongrels. They grew up in simpler times. They don't understand the social dynamics plaguing the youth. They don't understand the current economy because they're insulated from it with their stock portfolios and their retirement packages and their Social Security and Medicare. And they're stuck in the 1980s. They believe truly the trickle-down economy worked perfectly and that we're living in 1983 with perfect interest rates and cheap housing markets and a great stock market, etc., and blah, 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 blah. They're stuck in that. It's boomer-brained. And individually, the boomers are decent people, some of them. But collectively, they were a plague on America, and they continue to be. Why? Because obviously the youth doesn't get out and vote nearly as much as they should. 20-year-olds are more prone, sadly, and this is not to pay... You know, on this channel, I don't patronize Gen Z men, and I believe that they are truly a good future for America, but that doesn't go without saying the fact that a 22-year-old is more prone to sit at home and play Fortnite and then jerk off to VR porn than he is to go out and vote in his Senate election races, in the primaries for Senate or for governor even. They'll go out and vote for the president, and a lot of people will, but that's the extent of it. When it comes to town council, definitely not. When it comes to midterms, most likely not. That's just reality. That needs to change, by the way, and young men need to do better. And I hate to patronize, but that is one area where it's just objectively true. Meanwhile, the boomers, 75% of them as a voting bloc get out and vote in every single election. Every single one. They're a problem because what they bring to the polls is a politics are a team sport like mindset. That's why you see the boomers questioning the young guy, Scott Presler. Scott Presler's in politics sphere young. I believe he's like 37. Ground game guy, ground game expert, understands what the future generations want and does the ground game to push the Republican candidates forward. He endorses the right guy, probably only barely right, barely better, but still better than Darline Graham. And a boomer woman is questioning him. Why are you endorsing the guy who wasn't endorsed by Trump? The MAGA cult boomers strike again. This is one of the biggest problems plaguing us right now. It's going to continue to be a problem for at least a little while too. It is tapering off. It will get better, but you need to understand that is what is at play right now. And that leads me to what I wanted to talk about in regards to this Darline Graham victory. Thomas Massey right here. This is what I wanted to share as well. Thomas Massey wound up responding to this tweet from a retweet of Decision Desk HQ that announced her as the winner of South Carolina. You can see Thomas Massey tweeted, "We're not voting our way out of this." I do like Thomas Massey sometimes, but I'm not all in on Thomas Massey, and I probably never will be. And I'm saying that to say I disagree with Thomas Massey here as well. We're not voting our way out of this. Well, I can't stand people who say that, in all honesty. That's the ultimate black pill. And what that does is it really encourages the younger men who actually have the right viewpoints in this conservative party to give up on the system, to give up on voting, and to stay at home defeated, and to gamble on rain bet and jerk off to porn and play Call of Duty. Modern Warfare 4 sucks, by the way. You'd be better off going out and voting than playing that heaping pile of bullshit. And why does Modern Warfare 4 suck? Because of women. And why are women involved in all of this? Because of politics and men not maintaining a patriarchal Christian nationalist society. Not to go off on a rant there, but that actually fits right into what I'm saying here. Men need to get more involved. Here's the deal with this. First of all, it's only a matter of time until the 22 and 24 and 26-year-old guys, the Gen Zers, who are based politically and have the right views, age into 32 and 34 and 36 and 42 and 44 and 46-year-olds who will go out and vote. So the future will change inevitably. But what we really want to do is not just bank on that. We don't want to sit around and wait for another 10 years. We need it to change sooner. The way we accomplish that is multifold. First of all, we've got to evangelize and galvanize the voter base. There's a multitude of ways to do that. I'm doing my best, or trying to do my best on this channel to do that. But beyond that, we have to reform communities with each other. We have to get messaging out there and spread it. Go out and vote. Actually do it. Hold each other accountable, etc. It does start there. But secondly, and this is not a black pill, but this is a reality, things will unfortunately just have to keep getting worse until they get better. Change never occurs, truthfully, until someone has decided that they can no longer tolerate things for what they are. Intolerance leads to change. That's a reality of life. And so in some ways, I think America gets worse over the next hopefully just 2, but it's likely going to be 6 years at least, and maybe 10, but hopefully not. That's where we're going to see the youth, what are now the youth, galvanize and vote for actual real candidates, bearing in mind, of course, that the other part of the problem are the boomers. They're not getting younger. They're dying faster and faster every single year. And obviously they can't go quick enough, because the boomers will literally, they're so simple-minded, they don't read any of the real news for themselves. They watch Fox News headlines and they listen to a soundbite of Trump endorsing Darline Graham, and then if they do, God forbid, have social media, they use it to plague young guys like Scott Pressler in his 30s and say, why are you not supporting Trump's candidate? This is the issue. So that is what's going on right now. Now, not voting our way out of it. To get back to Thomas Massey's, little cutesy tweet there that I fervently disagree. I completely disagree with it. I disagree with the mindset that goes into it too. Because to say that is to not only give up hope, but it is also to recognize or support some sort of fantasy-like reality that will also never happen. Not to harp on it or go into detail on this, but people who say we're not voting our way out of it, they're very clearly insinuating that a violent revolution needs to take place in America. And I'm not some pussy here to tell you that I can't endorse violence. Here's the reality and why I don't endorse that. Because it's not possible in 2026. The last time revolutions broke out and took place, we were using muskets and cutlasses. And we had the same equipment as our military did. Do you know what the situation is now? You can hold 5 rounds in your AR-15 magazine. Any more than that is illegal. And on top of it, the military itself has drone dogs that sprint at 40 miles an hour now and have mounted machine guns on them. They have one-way attack suicide drones that will pinpoint you from above in the sky. They're barely the size of like a cardboard airplane, and they'll just dive down straight into your chest, drill into your heart, and explode. You're not most of you average goyim who weigh 285 pounds with your fat fucking cankles, you sit down after a long day of work and you get drunk off your beer and your goy slop food and you watch television in your armchair where you fall asleep pitifully alone next to your box of Kleenex and lube after eating a pizza and smoking weed. You're not going to do jack shit. You type on Twitter before you fall asleep, we're not voting our way out of this, with your triple chin and your cankles after you jerked off twice. There's no revolution coming from you. You may own your shotgun, but it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. So there is no other alternative other than to use the system, which is the proper way anyway. We don't want a violent revolution in America when all of the geopolitical landscape is currently chaotic, when China is seeking to undermine us economically, when we have all of these rivals at our throats. We don't want inner turmoil. We want to use the system to our advantage. The way we do that, we rise up and take the power back. Believe it or not, you can do that. You can do this thing called running for office. Also, the way we do that is by weaponizing our vote. And that's really what I want to get into here. Take a look at the results right here for Darline Graham. Let me make sure it's good on the vertical stream too. I'll zoom in. Oh, not like that. Hopefully you guys can see that well on the stream, on the vertical, but I'll just read it to you. Like I said just a few minutes ago here, where I thought it was, is pretty much where it's at. Projected winner, 99% of votes are in, 800 votes remaining, so there's no way Ralph Norman wins. He already conceded anyway. 52.5% of the vote went to Darline. That means 47.5% went to Ralph Norman. Why am I saying that? Why am I bringing this up? There's an answer to this. It reminds me, or at least creates a circumstance similar, and even more so similar than this one, but I'm going to show it to you anyway, because in many ways, right here, James Fishback's result against Byron Donalds in Florida. This is something that should stick with us for a multitude of reasons, and I did a live stream about this and how clear pilling it is and white pilling it is for James Fishback to have performed as well as he did. 10.5% he came in with, despite having no name recognition, no prior experience politically, and only $900 in his pocket, while refusing to receive any big donation dollars from AIPAC or big tech, since he outright advocated against Israel influence and against data centers. Jay Collins comes in with 25%, and Byron Donalds wins it, not with a majority, despite a Trump endorsement, but with merely a plurality at 47.8%. And Byron Donalds, this campaign, this was all funded in the form of $110 million. James Fishback was outspent over 100 to 1 and still put that much of a dent into it. Why do I bring that up alongside somebody like Darline Graham getting 52% as opposed to her opponent getting 47%? It's to remind you of something. These candidates, and especially James Fishback, they're getting support, and that support's not going to, it's not going to diminish over time. As the youth age into more of a block that gets out and votes, the 30-year-olds vote more than 20-year-olds. The 40-year-olds vote a lot more. The 50-year-olds vote the most, with the 60 and 70 and 80-year-olds. These kind of candidates will continue to rise up. Unfortunately, we don't want to wait that long. So the solution lies in recognizing where our power is. We can't currently, at our level, we can't actually win elections. Harsh reality for you. James Fishback ran the most aggressive, most flawless campaign I've ever seen. He only came in with 10.5. It's a significant number. It spearheaded the movement in many ways, and it's good. It is good, and it's a white pill still. But at the end of the day, it was only 10.5%. So you have to take the good with the bad on that and recognize how good of a sign and indicator it is for the future, while simultaneously recognizing what that means for the present. With that in mind, here's the actual idea. If you don't want the establishment H-1B AIPAC slave candidate like Byron Donalds being governor of Florida winning over David Jolly, and you're part of the 10.5% that voted for Fishback, then go and vote for David Jolly. Not because you're a Democrat or you agree with anything that he's saying, but because you send more of a message and have more of an impact weaponizing your vote against the establishment than you do trying to support the anti-establishment candidate currently from within. And the support of the anti-establishment candidate indicates that there is a strong enough of a number and force in our party to weaponize our vote. Here's the message you want to send. And this is exactly where, despite how I said at first earlier on this year, I didn't fully really agree or couldn't comprehend fully well, I actually could always comprehend because I'm a spiteful person, but the Nick Fuentes method of voting Democrat, I said, listen, I understand the thought process. Back when Biden won in 2021, I had a private conversation with one of my best friends who's a viewer on this channel oftentimes, and we said, spitefully, that we were spiteful enough to vote Democrat in the future if it meant teaching Republicans a lesson. And so when the Fuentes clip went viral, I understood what he was getting at. But there was that moral part of me that said, well, I don't know if I could vote Democrat. They're despicable. They hate the white people. They want to replace us in our own country. They support abortion. They're transgender freaks. They dye their hair blue. All this crap. Here's the reality. Here's how this year has unfolded since then. I have watched the Democratic Socialists rise up as a result of spending the last 10 years pissed off, not just at Republicans, but truthfully pissed off at their own party, watching Bernie Sanders be set up for defeat by Hillary Clinton back when Trump was initially running, forcing Bernie Sanders to take the knee, like the cuck that he is, to Hillary Clinton. A lot of the youth back then, the far left youth, were looking at Bernie Sanders as their white pill, and they watched their party establishment eat Bernie Sanders alive. And they've been pissed ever since. And they've been slowly and quietly galvanizing their base, growing in numbers, putting in the work for the last 10 years to produce the results we're seeing now. A Muslim Democratic young socialist candidate became mayor of New York City. His name's Zohran Mamdani. He's 33 years old. And he has fresh new ideas, that some of which even appeal to me as the far right opposite of him. The snow shoveling idea in New York City worked. A brilliant idea that could only come from a young mind. It was a good idea. It had its problems. Some people were lazy and got paid anyway. Fox News was quick to report on that. They reported on the irony of needing 2 IDs to verify in order to get paid by the city, $30 an hour to shovel snow. But New York City was undergoing a sort of major issue with the snowstorm. It took a young mind to solve it. You weren't going to get that kind of solution from an 80-year-old crustbag who loves Israel and wants to make sure Israel is safe in the Middle East while his city is blanketed with 2 feet of snow and people can't get to work. You get that from a young guy, and it just so happens that young guy was Zohran Mamdani, who then goes on to appoint other socialists in his district that get enough support to win their local elections, who then goes on to openly support a Coloradoan, however you say that, Democratic Socialist candidate who wins her district over a 30-year incumbent who had held the office longer than she had been alive, defeating that Democrat candidate, and another socialist rise up. We're seeing the socialists rise up in the Great Lakes states. We're seeing them rise up. I think it's something like over 30 Democratic Socialists have won their local primaries this year. This isn't just happening out of the blue. It's happening as a result of 10 years of building anger in the far-left Democratic youth who hate their own establishment alongside hating Republicans. This can be replicated and done so perhaps even faster on our side as a result of social media and what will be the coming rising resentment and anger on our side, having watched our establishment ruin our candidate, Trump, and turn him from a coalition leader, an anti-establishment coalition leader, into a warmongering neoconservative boomer filth who betrayed his movement, Trump. Let that anger sit in and let it build. Watching right now all of our attempts on our side, all of our guys on our side, like the James Fishbacks, rise up, who are not greeted at all by Fox News or given a single second of television time on the platform. Meanwhile, they invite Byron Donalds on multiple times. who's not even recognized or discussed by Trump or anybody for that matter, who they tried to sue off the ballot in Florida, who they created new rules for in Florida. The Republican Party did, the 10-10-10 matrix. They created new rules to keep him from being able to debate Byron Donalds in the primaries. The establishment right now on the right looks at the young far right-wing conservatives as a threat to the establishment neoconservatism candidates that serve the military-industrial complex in Israel. So they're squishing us down the best they can. It is inevitable, and we will rise up. Time is something they cannot defeat, but we want it to happen sooner. And that's where weaponizing your vote does come in, and that's where time has definitely swayed me entirely from being neutral to it and definitely deciding at the time to not vote Republican to now recognizing the real need to weaponize your 10%. 10% voting for Fishback was never going to win. 10% is not enough to win elections. It is enough to spoil them. And if the establishment is so hell-bent on fighting the youth right now on our side, the way they fought the Democratic Socialists 10 years ago over Bernie Sanders, then we should employ the tactics that sours their victories. We don't owe the Republicans our vote, and in many ways, Trump is now a living embodiment and proof that voting for the lesser of two evils doesn't actually do jack shit. This is not only not much better than Democrats, but in some ways, it's actually worse. Actually worse, because we're watching good campaign promises and concepts be destroyed conceptually and perceptively as a result of Trump's failures. The perception is reality in politics, and a lot of Trump's campaign promises were good. The implementation of them, though, have been so poor that a lot of Republicans now going forward in the future will shudder to use them. So with that in mind, the whole Nick Fuentes thing makes sense. You can't win with 10.5%, but you can certainly weaponize that to force the establishment to lose. And here's the signal you really want to send to MAGA. MAGA is going to obviously crumble after Trump. It's crumbling now. And the midterm elections this November are without a doubt going to go blue anyway. It's not like I'm sitting here saying vote Democrat so they go blue. They're going blue. At least the House of Representatives, and it's looking like there's a 50-50 chance that the Senate goes blue too. Nothing will stop this. This war has been deeply unpopular, and Trump has not focused on the American people at all. Our economy is shit, and his last-second stunt with Argentina with beef to lower the prices is see-through, and it's not going to work. Republicans will lose majorly. It's going to be a tremendous wake-up call in November. I'll be live for that too, and we'll celebrate it in some way. It won't feel good, but we'll celebrate it because it needs to happen. This is the lesson they need to learn. That being said, here's how they really learn a lesson. Because what they'll say is essentially, they'll go with the notion that is history, and they'll say, well, we did our best, but history has always set the precedent for the most part that, the ruling party never holds on in the midterms. If it's a Republican president, the midterms go blue. If it's a Democrat president, the midterms go red. This is just how it goes. We did our best, etc. That's what they'll say after the midterm election defeat. So what you need to do if you're going to weaponize your vote, you need to weaponize it in a way that really sends a message. If swing states go more blue, the Republicans still get to play off of that and say, well, that's just how it goes. However, if Florida gets a blue governor, if the Fishback voters vote for Dave Jolly over Byron Donalds, and Florida, which is considered a deep red state, goes blue with David Jolly as governor, that sends a tremendous message to the Trump administration, to the GOP establishment. If this happens, I've got this right here. This is another one that the GOP is losing their minds over. This is in Texas right now. Some early polls being reported by Fox News are showing that James Tallarico has a better chance of defeating the Republican in the Senate race for Texas, Ken Paxton. Take a listen to this.
Point lead now over the Republican Ken Paxton. Meantime, 17% of Democrats say they are concerned that Tallarico is too extreme. 36% of Republicans say they're concerned Paxton lacks character. And then there's the question of motivation. Right now, more Texas Democrats say they are extremely motivated to vote in November.
In summary, if Florida gets a blue governor, and that's not as big of a long shot as you think, if the Fishback voters, and many of them are saying this, if they go out and purposely vote for Dave Jolly, a lot of early preliminary polling before the GOP primaries were finished indicated that Fishback versus Dave Jolly would keep Florida red. Fishback versus Dave Jolly would result in a Fishback victory. This is what the early preliminary polling suggested. It then went on to suggest, however, that if Jay Collins went up against Dave Jolly would win. A Democrat would win. If Byron Donalds went up against Dave Jolly, it was closer than it was with Jay Collins. But if Byron Donalds goes up against Jolly, the early preliminary polling suggests that Dave Jolly would win again. And Florida would get a blue governor despite being deep red. Now you're seeing a Senate race that the entire nation seems to have its eyes on, indicating that there's a chance that James Tallarico, a far-left nutjob, will defeat Ken Paxton, a conservative. And I don't know much about Ken Paxton, but from what I've heard, he doesn't actually seem that bad. It's just unfortunate for him that it would be better for us if he lost. Because here's the deal. If under President Donald Trump, after doing such an abysmal job, Texas becomes more red, Florida becomes more red, and perhaps, I don't think there's hardly a chance of this at all, but perhaps Trump's golden pickup there in South Carolina, Darline Graham, if she now loses to Annie Andrews, a far leftist who advocates for gender-affirming care with children, meaning chopping some boy's dick off and allowing him to grow up thinking he's a girl, literally, if Annie Andrews defeats Darline Graham, I don't think there's a good chance at that at all. All the polls show that even with somebody as dumb as Darline, she comes in with a +5 advantage at least. But if the Fishback voters vote Jolly, if James Tallarico wins, if we see Florida, Texas, in some fantasy world, South Carolina, other deep red states become more blue, that sends a much stronger, more worrisome message to the GOP establishment, rather than them being able to fall back on saying, well, this is just how it always goes. We lost the midterms because the Republican is the president right now. They won't be able to hide behind that excuse if these deep red states go more blue. That's the messaging you want to send. You want to remind them that, yes, actually, the boomers are dying. The demographic the GOP caters to, that loves the war in Israel, they're dying. They're not the future of the party. The millennials and the Gen Zers are. And so the message you want to send is, yeah, you actually have to start prioritizing the youth more. You can't give us the James Fishback treatment, not allowing him on Fox News, trying to sue him off the ballot, changing the rules so he can't engage in debate against the establishment candidate in a primary debate. You can't keep doing that. We can't let them, they can't keep getting away with it. We can't allow it. That's the truth. So you have to weaponize your vote in understanding that 10% doesn't win elections, but it can cost elections. And that's where we hold the power for now until more of us age into the voting system where then we just have the voting power to actually propel James Fishback as governor of Florida and put him there, and to actually get a far right-wing candidate in Texas in, etc. For now, we don't have that. So that's my read on Darline Graham, and that is exactly where the Fuentes strategy that I wasn't sure how much I agreed with it on at first when it went viral all those months ago, that's where that comes in. That is what should happen. That is why I will be voting Democrat in the midterms. It's what needs to happen. I don't owe them my vote, and truthfully, they don't deserve it. And I'm not a boomer, and I'm not going to toe the party line and follow or obey the status quo. I won't fulfill it. You actually have to address me as a 30-year-old white millennial man. You must address me. And if you won't do it, then I'm not going to vote for you. That's the message we need to send. We need to remind them the boomers are not the future. They're dying. We're the future. That's all I've got to say about that. We'll see what happens. Things are going to get worse. Most people that message won't resonate with. Most people can't think long term like that. They think in matters of black and white. So, it is what it is. I don't even know if I want to look at the vertical stream chats. There's probably so many idiots in it. Hey, good to see Howard Clegg in the horizontal stream chat, though. I love this username, too. Boomer Knows Best. Are you employed, sir? No, I'm not employed at all. I am a jobless bum. I'm a jobless bum. I hold no job. I suck off the system. TC says Robert Pape is my favorite source on the Iran conflict. I just discovered him, and he was great. I was reading his Substack last night and today, and he was excellent. I watch every Pape interview I come across. They are always enlightening. Too bad no one in the Trump admin would consider consulting. And yes, how painfully true is that? I can't imagine Trump is disinterested in midterms. If we all go blue, at best he'll be impeached, but more likely he will go to jail. I don't know about that. I don't think Trump's ever going to jail. And we'll see about the impeachment thing. Here's the thing with the impeachment thing. The impeachment thing is as follows. I have doubts about him even being impeached. I think there's a good chance of him being impeached. I think there's actually a good chance of him even being impeached out of office. A better chance of him being impeached but not out of office. But I also think there's about a 50-50 chance that he doesn't get impeached at all. And here's why, and I've said this before. As I played on the clip earlier, Benjamin Netanyahu wants the Iran war for regime change. Trump stated at the beginning it's for regime change. That has not been a goal accomplished yet, and it's not going to be accomplished in time for the midterms. And so if Israel wants the war, and if Israel owns 80% of Congress, blue and red alike, and the war goals and objectives are not fully fulfilled, then an impeachment is not actually all that likely to happen because Israel will throw its weight around in our Congress to prevent it. If Trump is content to be a Manchurian candidate and destroy America from within, basically, and if he's content to be a Zionist candidate and be the useful Shabbos Goy to Israel and fight Iran, then an impeachment's not actually going to happen because Israel will just weigh in with blackmail and money like they always do with our candidates. That's what you have to remember. And this midterm election season is not going to change the amount of influence fast enough that Israel has. Yeah, Democratic Socialists are rising up on anti-Israel messaging. Republicans aren't, and there are still plenty of establishment Democrats that are resisting it. And they're going to win a lot of their districts as well back. So it's not going to change enough. Maybe Israel loses a couple percentage of points of its influence, but not enough to where it won't be able to move the supermajority of Congress still against impeachment. And that's one of the problems. Howard says it's even worse. We have states making de facto treaties with foreign countries. Yeah, it's weird too, and it shouldn't even really be allowed. David says, I was in the vertical. It's really low IQ. I was trying to inject sanity, but it's not possible. Howard says, I pop over to the vertical. I'm just amazed at it. Let's see. Oh, hey, hold on a second here. Stop everything. I recognize this name, Perictorius. Hey, Perictorius, congratulations. I remember you, and I thought about you on that night. Let me like it. Let me read what he's saying first, but congratulations. He says, hypothetical, what if we stay home and don't vote GOP and the Dems win the House and Senate and win in 2028, and then they get D.C. and Puerto Rico as states and permanently lock the GOP out forever? Well, here's the thing with this. First of all, wait, before I get into the black pill elements of all of that, congrats, because I was following Tom Tiffany because of you, and it turns out he was running against one of those Democratic nutjob socialists. And I remember, man, I won't go into details. Obviously, not this channel's not big enough anyways to probably expose it, but Congrats, dude, and good work in the ground game. I will say that. I've said this before about Perictorius. Great example of the youth actually getting involved. If we had all of the young people, Perictorius is in his 20s, if we had people, an army of people like that, doing the ground game and the groundwork and either supporting the candidates that are good or rising up to run as the good candidates, who then subsequently find support in the ground game, being led or being, where people like Perictorius are involved, then man, this country would be in a much better spot. Now, to answer the question, yeah, the Democrats win the House and the Senate and they win in 2028. They get D.C. and Puerto Rico in as states. First of all, they're not getting D.C. in as a state. That I rule out right away. You also left out the part where they want to pack the Supreme Court, right? Here's the deal with this. Do they actually pull that off is the question. There's always some sort of existential threat that is associated with every single election. Now, the whole idea of the Democrats winning in 2028, here's part of the notion of that. Voting blue in the midterms is not to prop them up for 2028. They're already propped up for all of that anyway. Voting blue in the midterms is to force a total cleanse of the right wing. And there's the answer is, and it's not a likable one, there's no guarantee that it works. The guarantee lies in the opposite. If you continue to support the GOP establishment, you'll continue to get the establishment candidates. And I already see these pages on Twitter from people who I know are young guys running them who still support the neocon mainstream filth. There's no world where if the establishment is healthy enough, you don't have the Benny Johnsons or, any of the mainstream media, shill-sucking type independent journalists out there still pushing the mainstream narrative. You will always have these large Republican political commentators who are independent but still pushing the narrative. The danger really lies in not allowing or being a part of destroying the current GOP establishment. And how do you do that? I understand the argument to this is, and you're a good example of the argument, doing the ground game and the work to change it. Unfortunately, what Trump has proven this year, especially 2026, is that even when you vote for the lesser of two evils and you put in a candidate that you think won't be as bad as a Democrat, it's just as bad, if not worse, in many ways. I'm grateful the border is shut down. That's the bare minimum. The H-1B visa Indians are pouring into this country still. He opened up an avenue for more Chinese students to come in. We're getting the same shit, only legal. So what does it matter? Like, we're going down the same road, and they used to say the Republicans go the speed limit, the Democrats haul ass down the road to destruction. The Republicans are increasingly gaining speed as well. And so the establishment must be destroyed. That's my stance on that. And it's a bit accelerationist, but the reality is the Democrats are the ones that will destroy the Republican establishment, with the idea being that the credibility of all of the establishment candidates in 2028 will be ruined. So J.D. Vance's credibility gone. We don't want him. I don't want him. He's big tech. He's Peter Thiel's boy. He'll be shilling for big tech, AI surveillance, data centers, etc. And that's already out of control. And one more example of what voting for the lesser of two evils gets you. It gets you flock cameras installed all across America without your permission. Nobody asked any of us if we wanted flock cameras. Here they are, in literally the tens of thousands, without our permission, happening under an entirely conservative political landscape. AI surveillance, watching you right now. Trump is president, the Senate is red, the House of Representatives is red, the Supreme Court is red. AI surveillance, violating our Fourth Amendment, being built right now. Right now. They're watching you, bitch. It's not the Democrats doing it. They don't have the power. So it's one more example. And that's why we don't want Vance. We don't want Rubio. More war. And those are going to be very clearly the two candidates placed before us in 2028. The establishment deems it so. They're already telling you. We don't want either of those. Guaranteed loss to Gavin Newsom or AOC or both if they run together. So you must destroy it now in 2026 and 2027. And then we need the candidates like a Fishback, but at a bigger stage with more experience. We can't have Fishback try to run for president. He just doesn't have the experience. Great ideas, great candidate all across the board. I think he knows he won't be trying, but we need somebody like him, but with the actual experience to be the dark horse candidate in 2028. That is the only hope, and it is a Hail Mary. And then there's the existential crisis, but that's going to be the narrative for every election. So I'm not saying I'm not buying into it entirely. I'm not saying I'm not worried about Puerto Rico becoming a state or packing the Supreme Court, but the whole thing is here's the reality. And I can't predict what a future looks like if Democrats get into 2028, and I can't say for sure that's not the future then. If people aren't willing to be the change that they need to be to save this country, then here's the reality. The country deserves to collapse. And the Declaration of Independence recognizes this. It is the right of the people to rise up and overthrow their government, but history has determined that people are more inclined to suffer great evils as evils are sufferable. And the only way that you actually get the change you want is to make sure that the environment is so uncomfortable that people can't tolerate it. True change only comes as a result of complete, lack of intolerance. People tolerate too much. So, if Democrats get in 2028 and they ruin the nation even more, so be it. So be it, because then it'll just keep getting bad. And if it gets bad enough, then something will have to happen. $27 Max says, so who is the left? Oh, and by the way, thank you for the $10 super chat, Perictorius. And here's the deal. I would rather that our political landscape looked like what you're doing, but it doesn't yet. It's just not there. It's starting to get there. You're one of the people spearheading it, so I give you props. We need more of that, and it will happen. But it could take years. It's going to take years to get to this point. The Democratic Socialists have been building this for 10 years plus. Now we're seeing the fruits of that. That's the lesson. I've been keeping my eyes on that ever since. Warmonger Mark Levin. I like that username. I'm not sure where this cat stands. He hates MAGA, rhinos, establishment Dems, and DSA. Where do you stand? I am a reactionary. I'm a reactionary, and I'm a separatist. I am a separatist reactionary. And I don't mean separatist meaning separate from the political parties, but what I mean is I separate myself from both of them. They're establishment, and they're both completely corrupted. And reactionary is to imply essentially a reactionary is somebody who wants to go back. Reactionary is the polar opposite of progressive. Progressives want to move forward with all their radical ideas. A reactionary looks at it and goes, we need to go back. We need to actively go back. We need to undo we need to be unburdened by what has been. We do, and we need to go back. We need to do a Kamala Harris. We do. And we got to go back. We got to look at the past and recognize what was better back then and go with that. I am a true conservative. I have actual standards, and I like more what I think more along the lines of what the founding fathers thought. And nowadays, they'd be considered very extreme. Another $10 super chat from Perictorius. He says, what if the GOP loses in 2028 and the GOP goes all in on Fishback and Fuentes stuff and the moderates break for the Dems and vote for a Shapiro AOC? Then America deserves its fate. I will stand by. I will uphold the standard of what I believe in to the very death. That is where I'm at. And I believe in the far right. I'm not even saying I believe in all of Fuentes' stuff. I think he's a bit of a... I'll never disavow a Fuentes. I actually like him. I believe in most of what he does. I think he's a bit of a contrarian at times, though, to his own dismay. Fishback, I support 100%. And if we're not going to have fishback, then we will have chaos. Here's the lesson in all of this too. Trump is a populist and not an ideologue. I advocate for a patriarchal Christian nationalist society, and I want to make that very clear from the start. And here's the truth. None of this works anymore because we're no longer a Christian nation. Our founding fathers were almost entirely Christian, and even the ones that weren't were deists that recognized a higher power. I have all of that in my pre-show. Everything from the Mayflower Compact all the way on through the Declaration of Independence, which acknowledges God multiple times. We were always intended to be a Christian nation. Our Constitution was written by Christians, and it was written under the premise that it would be a Christian nation going forward. A Christian nation is one that exhibits or displays the idea of self-governance. We don't have that anymore. We're a morally decaying society where women rise up and celebrate Lindsey Clancy for killing her children, and where men rise up on the left and celebrate their children chopping off their penis and identifying as women. It's disgusting and despicable. And so as a result of that, everything is falling apart. Our freedoms don't work without Christianity. Our Constitution is meaningless without Christianity. So this is to say, America will either have Christ or chaos. That is where we're at. And honestly, we are a cursed nation. I want to save it. But if we don't, then it will descend and it will collapse. That's the truth. That's where I stand, and I will stand by that firmly, especially after watching Trump do what he did. And now with the benefit of hindsight, understanding how important it is to not just vote for the populist, but to identify a populist ideologue. We need a populist ideologue type candidate. One who knows what is right and popular and promises to do it, but also has the conviction to follow through. That is not Trump. That is not Trump at all. And so, yes, Fishback is the perfect example of that. That is what we need. And if they continue to push forward these neocon warmongers, I will not vote for them, and I'll vote for the opposite. And the Republican Party needs to adapt to me, because that's what our politics is all about. I am not supposed to be forced to adapt to the political system. They're supposed to adapt to me. And if they won't do it, then I will serve them up the hardest, possibly most destructive lessons possible until they submit to the will of the people. That's the lesson. That's the lesson. We have gone so far astray that politics is a team sport, and the MAGA cult advocates for unquestioning support of their leader, Trump. And if you don't support him in everything, you're a traitor. Like, that's never how this political system was supposed to be set up, ever. That was never the intent. They're called representatives. They represent you, and they represent me. And if they won't learn that, and if they insist on pushing forward these neocon establishment picks, they're going to fucking lose, and they deserve to. No, the Founding Fathers did not all have different beliefs. They were literally all Christian except for 4 of them. 54 out of 58 or 53 out of 57 Christian, and the ones that were deist would later on become Christian, 3 out of 4 of them, including Benjamin Franklin, who literally in his advanced age called upon Congress to enter into prayer to God when they couldn't solve a problem and Congress was dissolving into a massive fight. Yeah, no, they were all Christian. They were different denominations, some of them, of Christian, but they were all Christian. That's why 8 out of the 13 original states had it written in their state constitutions that in order to hold power, you had to swear an oath to Christ and proclaim your faith in Christ as a Christian. Yeah, that's how America was founded as, sweetheart. Go back and read the Mayflower Compact from the settlers of this country. They're literally praying to God and giving God glory for landing on our nation's shores. Christian. Perictorius says, with another $10, dude, thank you for I do appreciate the super chats. He says, to be fair, I'm just slightly more establishment friendly than you are. Plus, I'm more willing to be left wing or syncretic or economic on economic policies. I'm like a cross between FDR and Trump. Well, it's interesting you say that too, because in some ways, it's almost fitting that the Democratic Socialists are rising. Trump himself has actually almost acknowledged that this might be the way that America goes forward when he said that he doesn't want to be remembered as Herbert Hoover. In some ways, he's almost projecting a possible future or of America that would be, displaying a rhythmic historical past of it. If Trump is recognized as a Herbert Hoover, if this Iran war decimates our economy and a Great Depression is ushered in, which is not a net zero chance of that happening, if the economy is much worse off after Trump and Democratic Socialists rise up into power, then history is truly rhythmic, because Herbert Hoover existed under the Great Depression as a conservative, and he tried to usher in tariffs, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, after the Depression set in. He tried to bail it out with tariffs, and it made it worse. And if that all happens 2.0 under Trump, and I voted for Trump, I like what he ran on, and I like the concept of tariffs when they're implemented correctly. That being said, none of this is going well. And if that all happens, FDR is who came after Herbert Hoover, a socialist, really. FDR was a socialist. So it is interesting you say that. Definitely. FDR was a legend. I didn't really like him all that much, though. I think a lot of what he did has been very harmful. But he was a legend. His fireside chats, etc., his voice alone, his statements that he made, everything. So, but that is interesting. Benjamin Franklin had hundreds of dead bodies because he was involved with the Freemasons, bro. Got it. Wow, thank you. You can go back to your Candace Owens channel now. Doesn't change the fact that it states in the Constitution it's not a Christian state. Yeah, that had to do with the history of where they came from in England. No national religion could be declared. It never said America wasn't a Christian nation. Here's the deal for you. The settlers were Christians, mostly Puritans. Most of the founding fathers were Christian. The laws were written with Christian ethics in mind. And up until the 20th century, America was a 91 to 97% white European Christian predominant majority nation. What does that by definition make America then? A Christian nation. A white Christian nation. That's how you could accurately define America in the late 1700s, and really in the 1600s as it was forming, of course, through the 1700s as it was expanding and gaining independence, into the 1800s when it continued to expand. White European Christian nation, the literal, historically accurate description of what America was. And you can hate on that all you want, but fuck you and fuck your feelings. It doesn't matter, you goy bitch. The truth is the truth. There were no minorities in America except for the black people who were brought here to be slaves. Wow, so harsh for me to say, but that's actually history, believe it or not. Look at all the last names on the Constitution and, Franklin, etc. White men who were predominantly Christian signed it. There were no Jewish last names. There were no Somalians in America. There were no Indians, none of it. It was a Christian nation, and a white one at that. Perictorius with a $20 super chat tariff. My dude. He says, and to be fair and honest, FDR ran as a conservative and called Herbert Hoover a socialist. Herbert actually started any of the public works program that FDR expanded. I liked FDR because he saved capitalism. Perfect? No. I appreciate that a lot, dude. Thank you for the $20 super chat tariff. I still do. There is a part of me that does like FDR. Every time I watch him back in history, I like his voice and everything else. I like what he did. I don't like the whole World War II thing, obviously, but no, I'm with you. I'm with you to some degree, and I do find it interesting. It's interesting. In some ways, I think you're the perfect reflection of what the youth is, and I think it's necessary that it's that way. I actually like that. The boomers, again, it's like they view politics like sports, and the further down you go in generations, the younger you go, the more that they don't view it that way. So the more inclined they are, in what I believe is rightfully so, a desperation from us to search for answers to save America, the more inclined people are to just hear out both sides. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. All of a sudden, the left cares about history after they rip down historic statues and monuments. Yeah, exactly. Most people never look at the history and how all these countries have evolved, starting with World War I. Yeah, well, World War I was conducted in large part to finish off the age of empires, quite literally, and then World War II was started for a different reason. But to pick up on that and enhance it and, ultimately give us the result we have now. If you don't understand what President Trump has done already, then you're not going to understand that he already saved America. Oh, dude. Pray tell. Pray tell. Warmonger Mark Levin, stating facts. Appreciate you. Well, listen. It's been a good evening. I appreciate all you guys for being here, truly. Been looking at this vertical chat long enough. Anything good in the horizontal? Not really. But either way, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you, Perictorius, for all the super chats tonight. That does make my night, man. I appreciate it. Doesn't sound like we fully agree, but I think at the end of the day, we probably are more politically aligned than we're not. And again, congratulations on your groundwork. That payoff had to have felt pretty good. May it continue to pay off for you in the future. I think you're doing good work, and my whole spiel against the establishment is not to try to downgrade or downplay your efforts. It's just in recognition that I don't think there's enough of you out there yet. That is what I pray for, though. I want to see America. I want to see more of that, and it will happen. It's just not enough right now. Keep doing what you're doing, because you're spearheading a lot of different things and a lot of good stuff. So it's not even to try to discourage you; it's to encourage you. Keep going. You're doing great stuff. I'm actually, because of you, I've been taking a different approach where I live as well. You're literally, in some ways, some of the inspiration. We got to get our community back, and it's not to harp on the whole religion thing, but that is part of the downside of America becoming inherently less Christian. Even if you don't agree with Christianity, even if you want to be a loser atheist in my chat, you don't even believe in yourself, but yet you want to tell other people what they can't believe in, right? You have to admit, the church itself comes with an inherent community built into it. The problem is that church hasn't been utilized. The church community has not been utilized. People do not understand that Christ came to build an ecclesia, not a kuriakon. Epitauti te Petra, oikodomiso mutin ecclesia. He wanted to build a governing body, and our Western Protestant church has become a kuriakon, a building where people just come consume. And so the church, in many ways, has failed society. But the church itself has the community needed to make the change. And because less and less people have gravitated to it and they're not Christian anymore, that community has gone away. So Perictorius, and what you're doing, you're involved in a community. Even if it's not religiously based, it's a community where strength can be found, and from there true change can happen. So I applaud you in that effort. That's what we need more of, and I'm trying to do my part now where I live to do the same thing, because doing this on here I think is useful, But if all you wind up doing is bitching and moaning and complaining, then you're just going to live and die like Rush Limbaugh, or not to throw shade because I like him, but like Steven Crowder. You're on the air for 30 years. What's gotten done? What's changed? If all you do is complain about it, they don't care. You have to get physical. And by that, I mean go out in the real world, form communities, and make a movement and create the change. So I really appreciate people like you. Just want to put that out there. Thank you for the super chat posts as always. Thank you to all the support tonight on the show. I appreciate you guys. Like the stream if you haven't already. It's not too late. Double tap your phone screens, hit the thumbs up button. It's free to do. And subscribe right now. It's the least you could, literally it's the least you could do for you fat goy. It's the least you could do is just like the stream and subscribe. Turn on post notifications so you're notified every time I go live. That's the least you could do, you useless scum. Other than that, with that being said, thanks for tuning in. Thanks to the super chatters. Glory to America, the best nation on earth, and we will restore it to glory. It may just take some time, and darker days may be ahead first. But glory to America regardless. God bless the USA, and may God bless some of you in chat. Some of you, may God bless you. Others, I don't really care. Go off and waste your life in whatever way you deem fit, you scum. But God bless you all. Take care. Have a great rest of your evening. I'll be back here live tomorrow. So stay tuned. Take care. Bye-bye.
There are too many minorities. Too many. At my water park. Somebody do something. Where did they all come from? Why can't they leave this land alone? And it's such a tragedy. Feel bad like dying. We look the other way too long. We've got to change our priorities and get all these minorities out of my water park.